Chapter 374. Hui Mao was the typical type of creature that built its own happiness on the pain of others, so it was especially happy to see those new students being tortured. However, what disappointed Hui Mao was that Silan was only there to conduct an investigation and write a report to submit. The layout of the examination venue was suggested by the various instructors of the assessment team. Before the event began, the person in charge would filter and arrange the candidates based on the reports submitted by the various instructors. Therefore, until then, no one would know which of the suggestions would be adopted and which assessments would be arranged. Not every tutor in the assessment team would be assigned this task. Only Silan had been assigned it. So, Silan had to sort out a report and submit it before the next meeting. This was Silan's first time doing this, so compared to the other tutors in the assessment team, he needed to spend more time and energy on research and practice. The instructors who had taken the test in the past only needed to refer to their own reports. Silan, on the other hand, needed to make a rough assessment of the temperature, humidity, air pressure, species, terrain, and so on in this area. Although these data had been published on the instructor's public platform before, Silan hoped to personally experience it during the process. The next morning, Silan returned to the dormitory. The dormitory was already full. When Silan entered the room, 4 people were sitting around the dining table eating breakfast and gossiping. When they saw Silan, the 4 looked at him at the same time. As they were sizing up Silan, Silan also observed the 4 of them. One of the mutants was the one who had fought in the open-air training ground yesterday. There was also a mutant among the other 3, and the other 2 were normal humans. "Hey, brother, you haven't returned all night. Where did you go?" One of them asked Silan with a smile. "I had something to take care of." Silan put a bag of food on the table and opened it for them to eat. "You guys eat." "I've already eaten. It's still warm." One of them couldn't wait to grab it with his hands, not afraid of the temperature in the bag. Everyone introduced themselves to each other. The other 2 were nobles, but they weren't upper-class nobles. Perhaps for some reason, they weren't as arrogant as the other nobles, and they got along well with the other 2. They didn't wear their family's emblem all the time either. However, when Silan revealed his name, one of them even joked, "Why do you have the same name as the founder of the Return Forum?" There were many people named Silan in the Empire, and most of them had never seen Silan before. They even thought that the founder of the Return Forum was an upper-class noble. Therefore, when Silan's name was revealed, the others didn't associate these 2 characters together. The Return Forum was very famous, but not everyone would pay attention to this founder. More people knew about the Return, but didn't know about Silan. While he was speaking, the sound of a zipper rang out, and a cat's head popped out of Silan's backpack. After looking around once, it jumped onto the table and took a piece of pastry from the bag. Then, it raised its tail and jumped onto Silan's shoulder, starting to chew on it. It had just woken up and was hungry. "You have a cat. You actually brought a pet here." The few people at the table looked at Silan in disbelief. Everyone who came here was full of drive and only thought about how to pass the selection test. Who would have the mind to take care of a pet? They weren't women, so they weren't that meticulous. However, although servants weren't allowed to bring here, there were no restrictions on pets. Silan looked at Hui Mao, who was focused on eating, and smiled. "This guy is quite easy to take care of." "Indeed, your cat isn't a picky eater," one of his roommates commented, thinking that he knew the truth. Silan didn't explain further. He went into his room and put down his backpack. He opened another bag for Hui Mao's breakfast and went to the bathroom to take a shower. After a busy night, his clothes were covered in dust. By the time Silan came out, the other 4 had already cleaned themselves up and were sitting at the table. It looked like they were waiting for Silan. "What's wrong?" Silan asked. "Chuck is going to the shooting range to compete with someone. We're all going to cheer for him. Are you coming?" One of them asked. Chuck wasn't a mutant, but he had a good physique and fast reflexes. Although she looked a little bashful, if the coldness under this bashful surface was revealed, it would be hard for others to bear. Dual personality. That was Silen's first impression of Chuck. However, for a shooter, dual personality wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Alright, give me half a minute. I'll be right there. Silen went back to his room to change his clothes. There's no rush. There's still half an hour before the appointed time. Haven, the mutant that Silen had met at the open-air training ground, said nonchalantly. Hui Mao didn't follow Silen this time. He was going to discuss strategies with King Kong and the rest later. Silen was a little skeptical about the strategies Hui Mao mentioned. However, since it was the animal's business, Silen wouldn't interfere. Even the person in charge didn't care, and let the animals do whatever they wanted. The competition was not held at the open-air training ground, but in a large indoor training ground specially built in the accommodation area where the candidates were. The venue had been booked the day before for the competition. There weren't only 2 people competing, but more than a dozen of them. They had all chosen to shoot in the 3rd round of the 5th round of the exam. Some of the aristocratic candidates wore their family insignia on their chests to show their special and superior status. There were quite a lot of aristocrats here, but some of them didn't wear their family insignia, such as Chuck and the girl sitting on a high stool next to the shooting range. Hey, Silen, Ivia is looking at you. Haven said softly, nudging Silen with his elbow. Although Ivia didn't wear her noble insignia, through the spread of gossip, everyone knew that this young lady was from the Nahasi family, one of the military giants. It would be fine if she was an ordinary noble, since there were many of them here. However, as a member of the Nahasi family, who ranked at the top among the upper nobles, she could enter AF3 directly. Moreover, her age had also reached the standard of AF3. However, to many people's surprise, this noble lady didn't take the shortcut. Instead, she came to participate in the 5th exam. She wanted to enter AF1 or AF2. However, Ivia was indeed capable. Ivia's shooting was very good. This was something that many people had experienced. Ivia did not participate in today's competition. If Ivia participated, the other candidates would definitely go easy on her. Even if they did not go easy on her, they would still feel uncomfortable and feel that whatever they did was wrong. If they angered this noble lady, they would not be able to get anything out of it even if they managed to enter the affiliated school. In fact, it wasn't that Ivia didn't want to participate, but she was warned. Yesterday, she had asked someone to investigate Silen, and what she got in return was a scolding from her father. He warned her not to cause any trouble, or else he would send someone to kidnap her and throw her into the army for 2 years. If it wasn't for the support of Ivia's grandfather, General Nahasi, Ivia wouldn't have had the opportunity to participate in the selection test. After all, most people with her family background would directly enter AF3. Her cousins Tosin and Brielles had entered AF3 in the same way. However, after old General Nahachi found out about the incident with Taita, the little fellow from the Yurong family, he encouraged his grandchildren to participate in the selection test of the affiliated schools. We must speak with our own abilities. Thinking of this rare opportunity and her father's warning, Ivia decided to stay put for the time being. Therefore, when she saw Silen walking into the hall, she didn't go up to him. Instead, she kept staring at Silen. Like many people, Ivia only knew about the return forum. She didn't pay attention to academic matters, so she didn't know about Silen. As for the ranking of AF3, she never paid attention to it. Anyway, her cousin Tosin was also a famous person in AF3, so the others didn't matter. Since she couldn't challenge Celine, Ivia could only stare at Celine to see what was so special about him that her father had warned her over and over again. Silen didn't care about Ivia's scrutinizing and slightly hostile gaze. He didn't investigate Ivia's identity because it wasn't necessary. After all, he wasn't a candidate this year, so he wasn't a competitor. Silen didn't think it was necessary to look at Ivia's hostile gaze. Chuck, don't be nervous. It's just a competition. Just treat it as a practice match. It's not an official exam anyway. Relax, calm down. His roommates were comforting and encouraging him. Chuck actually wanted to say that he really wasn't nervous, but seeing how enthusiastic his roommates were, he held back. Chuck knew that among all the candidates, Ivia was his biggest competitor. Not only because both of them were good at shooting, but also because both of them were nobles. The competition between nobles and nobles would affect the reputation of their families. If the result was bad, Chuck would definitely be ostracized by his family. The staff of the training ground came over to explain the rules to the candidates. Although this was only a warm-up competition before the official exam, for the sake of fairness, he invited 3 instructors who were highly accomplished in shooting to be the judges. At first, the 3 instructors were a bit arrogant, but when they looked around, they saw Sillin sitting among the spectators. Those who were good at shooting had much better eyesight than others. They were able to dig out Sillin from the crowd with a single glance. Sillin nodded at the 3 instructors with a smile before turning his attention back to the field. Seeing that Sillin was only watching from the sidelines, the 3 instructors went along with Sillin's wishes. As shooting enthusiasts, all 3 of them were very envious of Sillin. It wasn't just because Sillin was Guanfeng's favorite disciple, it was also because they knew that Sillin was the only one among Guanfeng's disciples who carried a Purgatory Thunder Snake S. As instructors who paid close attention to Guanfeng and knew some of Guanfeng's inner secrets, it was only natural that they knew Sillin better than anyone else. The competition soon began, and Sillin was a lot calmer than the other spectators. The shooting of these people was very interesting, and some of them even had tricks up their sleeves, causing the spectators to cheer loudly. Chuck took first place by a small margin. Just like Sillin thought, Chuck looked like a completely different person when he was on the shooting field. He was no longer shy, but more like a cold-blooded hunter. There were no fancy moves, no ripples, and he killed his prey in one shot. Chuck's cold and emotionless eyes made his roommates feel like he was a stranger, but when they thought about it, they understood. No one here was an ordinary person, and everyone had their own trump cards and characteristics. Chuck turned back into the shy big boy again after he reloaded his gun and walked out of the field. This time, however, no one looked at him the same way they did before. Chuck didn't think much of winning first place in a warm-up match. The experts hadn't even shown up yet. Moreover, he hadn't used his full strength in this warm-up match. After the competition was over, Sillin was about to return to the dorm with his roommates, but someone grabbed him by the neck before he could take more than 2 steps. Sillin knew it was him the moment he got close. Since the other party didn't mean him any harm, and they were people he knew, Sillin didn't resist. "Boy, you didn't even tell us that you were coming over. You're free right now anyway, so why don't we go have a drink and talk?" a big man with a full beard said while strangling Sillin's neck. He controlled his strength very well. He didn't let Sillin escape easily, nor did he hurt Sillin. Sillin had seen this mentor before. He often sought out Guanfeng, but most of the time, he came back empty-handed. The jaws of the people standing around Sillin dropped to the ground, especially the 4 people in the same room. They stared blankly at Sillin chatting with the instructor who was sitting at the judging table and commenting on the shooting skills of the examinees in an extremely natural manner. Sillin motioned for his 4 roommates to leave first before he was dragged out for a drink by the mentor. Many people in the field saw this scene, and a few of them recognized Sillin's identity. However, they didn't say anything because they didn't want to give others a chance to curry favor with him. At the same time, they were puzzled. Didn't Sillin participate in the last term? What was he doing here this time? Sillin was dragged out of the training field by the mentor to a reception center where the mentors could relax and have fun. "Hey, Sillin, why don't you take out your Purgatory Thunder Snake S and have a look? Great teacher Guan isn't here right now anyway." The bearded mentor wasn't in the mood to eat the sumptuous meal on the table. He rubbed his hands and said to Sillin. Sillin picked up a piece of meat with his chopsticks and put it into his mouth. After he was done, he answered politely, "No. You're too stingy. It's not like you'll lose a piece of meat just by looking at it. But it will misfire." "Nonsense, do you think a Purgatory Thunder Snake can misfire?" In the end, the bearded mentor failed to pry the Purgatory Thunder Snake S out of Sillin's hand. When Sillin returned to his room, Hui Mao hadn't returned yet. The other four looked at Silen strangely. Silen, you're not some big shot, are you? Hawen asked. No, I just know that mentor. Just. Forget it. Since you're not willing to tell me, I won't force you. But. Hawen moved closer to Silen and said mysteriously, you must have gotten a lot of information about the exam, right? Silen looked at the four of them who were full of anticipation and nodded. I do know a little about this. Silen told the four about some of the lessons he had learned from his previous experience. It wasn't a thorough examination, and Silen himself didn't know what kind of questions he would be tested on. Every term had its differences, so Silen only shared some of his experiences. The four of them benefited a lot from Silen's experience. They also seized the time to make some preparations. They weren't stupid enough to share their experiences with the other candidates. After all, they were all competitors. After Silen returned to his room, he sent the compiled report over. Then, he lay on his bed and thought. He had a feeling that he would get something very useful from this incident. As for what it was, Silen didn't know. It was just a hunch. The next day, Silen went to attend a meeting with the mentors of the assessment team. The other four in the dormitory also squatted in their own rooms to prepare for the next test. The mentors' meeting was nothing more than explaining the information of the selection test and assigning tasks. Amidst the candidates' anticipation and nervousness, the selection test officially began. The first round of the written test. Unlike the thick stack of test papers given to them during Silen's cohort, there were only 3 test papers this time. However, the questions weren't easy to answer. Silen discovered that there were quite a few questions that were in the middle of the exam, and it all depended on how the examinees handled them. Silen wasn't invigilating the first round of the exam. Instead, he was watching the situation in the surveillance room with the other mentors. Due to the special nature of the venue, the mentors could see every candidate's situation very clearly. However, the candidates couldn't see what was happening outside through the optical partition. Even if the invigilators were standing next to the partition, they wouldn't know. This was also the first round of the 5 tests. Previously, Silen was in the position of a candidate. This time, however, he was standing in the surveillance room where the mentors were. It was quite interesting to be in the same venue but with different roles. After the written test, it was the second round of the physical stress test. Many mutants revealed their true forms. Some of them, who usually looked simple and honest, looked much more ferocious after transforming. However, one had to admit that their combat strength was indeed terrifying. The third round of the 3 tests was the easiest for many candidates. At least, they didn't have to write or undergo physical and chemical stimulation. When Chuck and the other 3 examinees saw Silen at the shooting field area, they froze like statues for a long time, just like the rest of the examinees. Hawen raised his trembling hand and pointed in Silen's direction. That's Silen. Our dormitory mate, Silen. Chuck gulped and the corner of his mouth twitched. Seems like it. Fuck. How did he become an assessment mentor? That couldn't be a temporary replacement. The assessment mentors all had their identification badges on them. A temporary replacement wouldn't have one. No wonder Silen had been so relaxed. No wonder he didn't move with the 4 of them during the exam. No wonder he didn't get knocked out by the first 2 rounds like the other candidates. Silen even smiled at them in a friendly manner. However, this smile was too shocking for the 4 of them. It was as if he was agreeing with their thoughts and saying, "Ah, I'm actually an assessment mentor." The 4 of them felt as if a herd of mud horses were galloping across the grass in their hearts. Chapter 375. A lot of people had seen Silen during the warm-up match before the 5th round of the AF1 entrance examination, and it was mainly because Silen was very familiar with a shooting judge's mentor. That was why everyone had noticed him. When they saw Silen standing at the top of the stage with the judges, they couldn't quite accept it. Everyone was about the same age, but when they stood on the stage, he was already standing at the same height as the judges. Compared to the examinees' shock, the examinees didn't have much anticipation. Some people might say that he was just lucky enough to get a good gun, but that wasn't the case. The teachers of the affiliated schools all knew how difficult it was to master a Purgatory Thunder Snake. During the last competition, Silen's Purgatory Thunder Snake K had stunned the entire audience. Compared to that, the examinees didn't have much anticipation for him this time. The S they were hoping for wasn't one of them. Most of the examinees had only heard of the Purgatory Thunder Snake S before. Even Guan Feng's disciples hadn't seen it with their own eyes. Guan Feng's evaluation of the S was very high compared to the K, and Guan Feng's expectations for the holder of the S were even higher. Up until now, Silen was the only one who had the right to use the S, but Silen hadn't shown up yet. Some examinees suggested that Silen should open the test, but Silen turned down the suggestion. The S was too powerful and explosive. It would probably cause a lot of damage here. However, the examinees were surprised to hear that the person in charge of the shooting range, the group leader of the examinees, told everyone to stop for a moment before the test began. He said that someone would come over and demonstrate the whole process of the test. The instructors of the assessment team were very surprised. In the past, it was either one of the instructors who did the demonstration, or it was a video recording. Didn't they say that they would play a video recording directly if Silen was unwilling to do it? What's going on? A examinee asked. I'm not sure. I think the person in charge of the examinees received the news at the last minute. But judging from the way he's acting, he should be someone who can control the situation, right? While the examinees were discussing among themselves, the examinees were looking forward to it. Usually, the examinees were the examinees, but they didn't know who it would be this time. Under everyone's doubtful and expectant gazes, the person who was going to give the opening demonstration appeared on stage. As soon as he saw the person, Silen knew what was going to happen next. Guan Feng. What is he doing here? The examiners asked curiously. Since Guan Feng had passed the test to Silen, he shouldn't have come here. Moreover, Guan Feng had never been interested in this kind of test, so what was going on this time? Some of the examinees recognized Guan Feng. Although Guan Feng didn't appear much in the media, a lot of people paid attention to him because of his fame. Guan Feng. Guan Feng. My idol. I really worship him to death. The examinees were boiling with excitement. Guan Feng's opening demonstration was worth it even if his results weren't ideal. Some of them were thinking that they should do their best to perform well in front of Guan Feng. Maybe Guan Feng would take a fancy to them. The mentor's focus was different from the examinees. Their main focus was on the girl who had appeared with Guan Feng. Celine, don't tell me that's your junior sister. A teacher asked. She is. She's called Tang Qiuqiu. Silen was very proud of Tang Qiuqiu. When he saw the excitement in Tang Qiuqiu's eyes, Silen knew that Tang Qiuqiu had been very happy recently. She must have gotten in touch with a lot of Great Teacher Guan's private goods. So who's going to go up later, Great Teacher Guan or your junior sister? Junior sister. Although Guan Feng hadn't told Silen beforehand, Silen knew that Great Teacher Guan had come to show off. Guan Feng sat down on a chair at the side of a fan-shaped testing field after he walked into the field. He didn't look like he was going to enter the field at all. His behavior puzzled the expectant examinees. Then, they saw a girl about the same age as Ivia walk straight into the fan-shaped field. Unlike Silen, who was carrying an unassembled case into the field, Tang Qiuqiu took out a gun from the holster at her waist. Most of the examinees hadn't seen this gun before, but all the past students and instructors had. It was the gun model Silen had used last term, the Purgatory Thunder Snake K. The door of the fan-shaped testing field wasn't closed, and the examinees outside were holding their breaths in anticipation. Therefore, the countdown sounded very clear. As the countdown continued, many people noticed that the machine in the testing field was displaying the gun wielder's physiological parameters. Judging from these parameters, the examinee standing in the middle of the testing field was shockingly calm and natural. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bang bang bang. Continuous gunshots rang out, and the system's hit targets kept popping up. While the examinees were still in shock, Tang Qiuqiu had already put away her gun and walked out of the testing field. Guan Feng smiled faintly and left with the still calm Tang Qiuqiu. That's it. The examinees came back to themselves and were puzzled. Before they started shooting, they saw that the target was 100. How come it was gone so quickly? How come I only heard 15 shots? I only heard 14 shots. 16 shots. No, it's just 15, no matter how many shots it was, it couldn't hide the fact that these shots had destroyed 100 light targets. The examinees' faces twitched. One of the instructors clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles cracked. That bastard Guan really, has gone too far. Too far. Yes, he had gone too far. It's fine if you didn't take out your gun, it's fine if you didn't join the examinees, and it's fine if you accepted a disciple. But what you did just now was blatantly showing off. So what if you have a disciple? What's so great about having another disciple who uses a K? What's so great about having an underage disciple who's only in his teens? Fuck, this is so infuriating. Sillin picked his nose to hide the smile on his lips when he saw the instructor's pissed faces that looked like shit. Although Guan Feng had controlled himself well, Sillin knew that the great instructor was enjoying himself inside. He was probably so satisfied with Tang Qiuqiu that he came over to show off and lower everyone's morale. Not only did Guan Feng's leisurely stroll infuriate the examinees to death, it also dealt a blow to a lot of examinees. Of course, there were even more examinees who admired Guan Feng even more. As expected, famous instructors were different. Just look at how strong his disciple is. I heard that there's a class for Guan Feng after entering the affiliated schools. Yes, I have to get in. What are you laughing at? Don't think that I won't know you're laughing at me just because you're covering me. An old instructor roared at Sillin, what are you waiting for? Go and invigilate the exam. Sillin didn't mind the instructor's anger. He organized the documents in his hands and got to work. The examinees worked extra hard in the fan-shaped area that Sillin was in charge of. Why? Everyone knew that Sillin was Guan Feng's student, and the news had spread like wildfire a long time ago. Anyone who didn't know would be an idiot. Since Instructor Guan wasn't here, they had to perform better in front of Sillin. After a female examinee had finished shooting and mustered her courage to talk to Sillin and receive his reply, the other examinees behind her did the same. They would also take the time to talk to Sillin during the gap between their tests. Many of them talked about Guan Feng and the Purgatory Thunder Snake. May I ask if you're the founder of Return? A examinee asked Sillin nervously after the exam was over. This time, it wasn't because Sillin was Guan Feng's student, but because he used honorifics when he mentioned the founder of Return. I am. Sillin gestured for the examinee not to be nervous. Thank you very much for the forum. The examinee bowed to Sillin and left. He was one of the group of people who received their living expenses from the bounty on the forum and was lucky enough to be recommended. They had always been grateful to Celine. It was because they came from the bottom, and they knew how rare this opportunity was. That was why they cherished it even more and were even more grateful to the person who gave them this opportunity. Ivia was also assigned to the fan-shaped area that Sillin was in charge of. Unlike the others, she didn't ask questions after the exam. Instead, she said, "See you next." Sillin didn't comment. He wouldn't be staying in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire for long before he had to return to the League of Stars. Among the examinees, Ivia was the one who suffered the greatest blow. They were both girls of the same age, but anyone with a discerning eye could tell the difference between their shooting skills even without the analysis of the testing equipment. Although Tang Qiuqiu's performance couldn't compare to Sillin's last term, Tang Qiuqiu was definitely the best among all the examinees in this shooting field. It had nothing to do with firearms. Even if she was given an old rifle that she had never touched before, she would still be able to achieve shocking results. There was also her terrifying mental fortitude. The little girl would probably perform the same even if her targets were real people. She was a natural marksman. This was the common thought of everyone who knew shooting after watching Tang Qiuqiu's performance. After the 3 rounds were over, Han wanted to take the opportunity to ask Sillin about their results in the past few rounds, but time didn't allow for it. He was dragged away right after the round was over to participate in the next round. Fortunately, there were no additional matches in the 3rd round. However, Sillin felt that the 4th round would probably be more difficult than the previous one even though the additional matches had been cancelled. Hui Mao hadn't returned for the past few days because he was busy discussing strategies with King Kong and the others. Judging from the special way those animals thought, the examinees probably weren't that lucky. Zhen Xingming and the others had come to team up with Chuck and Han because they were Sillin's roommates. Even if Sillin's roommates were unreliable, they couldn't be trash, could they? Before entering the testing area, King Kong sauntered past the entrance. It had been a long time since they last met, and King Kong had grown a lot taller and stronger. Even though there was some distance between them, the examinees in front of the entrance still felt an invisible pressure. When passing by the entrance, King Kong paused and looked at the examinees standing at the entrance. Then, he calmly raised his hand and dug his nose with his thick fingers. Once he was done, he flicked his finger on the ground. Pfft! A pile of sticky stuff was lying on the ground. The examinees. They had to be careful not to step on that thing when they entered, or they would be so disgusted that they would puke. Sillin was glad that he hadn't run into a situation like this, and that Taita had taken a back door. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't have been able to pass so easily. After flicking his nose, King Kong twisted his big butt and left, leaving the flustered examinees behind. They suddenly felt a mountain of pressure on them. Sillin stared at the forest in the distance. King Kong's behavior just now was probably a signal from Hui Mao. Sillin saw the gray shadow when King Kong left just now. As a member of the assessment team, Sillin did not enter the testing area. The former students of AF1 and AF2 had already gone in to cause trouble, and the animals who liked to cause trouble for no reason were starting to stir as well. Sillin adjusted the coordinates on the light screen in front of him. His main focus was on Zhen Xingming and the others. After all, they knew each other and would definitely pay attention to this. Many of Sillin's suggestions regarding the deployment of the testing area had been adopted in the report he submitted. However, everything else was insignificant compared to the trouble Hui Mao and the others had caused. Due to King Kong's performance at the entrance of the testing area, the examinees were very careful about where they were stepping after they entered. However, traps didn't only exist under their feet. A group of examinees heard a roar similar to that of a leopard when they were completely disoriented in the forest. Moreover, they couldn't determine where the roar came from at all. Sometimes they thought it was coming from the left, but the next moment it was coming from the right, and in the blink of an eye, another roar came from the front. The examinees who had been maintaining a high level of nervousness were now driven crazy. They threw rocks in all directions, but it was useless. A black shadow flashed by, bringing with it a dense smell of blood, causing the already tense nerves of the examinees to become even more taut. People had died in this testing area before. Be it the examinees of AF3 or the new examinees, no one would be careless when they came here. Sillin stared at the collapsed cat and leopard on the monitor and shook his head. Hui Mao loved to create a sense of tension in people, so Hui Mao had specifically consulted Cheto for this game. Cheto was reading a book at the time, and he answered Hui Mao's question, "Humans are different from you. When they come into contact with nature, they will develop a sense of fear. Every one of them will develop a self-awareness of the things they have experienced during their growth, and their self-awareness includes the harm they have suffered during their growth. This harm will form a fear that will slowly accumulate. This fear may or may not show up on normal days, but it is true that it is hidden inside their bodies. As a deep layer of fear that is hidden inside their minds, it is possible for it to form some symptoms under enough pressure, such as hallucinations, schizophrenia. As an animal, or more accurately, as a half-animal, Huimao couldn't understand the fear Cheto was talking about. He had always been at the top of the food chain, so Huimao didn't know what fear was. However, Cheto's words had given Huimao a lot of inspiration. Fear was not necessarily a physical entity, and the hunter did not have to really stand up. It was just like when it played with sparrows. It liked to watch those sparrows chirp and fly around in panic, but it would not directly swallow them in one bite. Other than this group of pitiful examinees, there were a few other groups who had been fooled by Huimao and other wild beasts. One group was so focused on the flying cat that they ignored the giant King Kong's booger that they didn't dig a hole in the ground, but it was covered in dust. The psychological damage was greater than the physical damage. The examinees weren't afraid of bleeding or pain, but what would you think if your legs were covered in the sticky booger of a large animal, or if you found a cat peeing upstream of the stream you just drank? The sea, land, and air were all traps. At the beginning, the examinees who were unwilling to meet the previous term's students became more and more adorable as time went on. They were 100 times cuter than those fucking animals. When the examinees finally walked out of the testing area one by one, those who had strong mental fortitude were fine, but those who were weaker were vomiting and having diarrhea. Those who had eaten half a caterpillar were so weak that they looked like they were on the verge of death. The wrong road signs leading directly to man-eating salamanders weren't a big deal. The things that they felt uncomfortable at the beginning became more and more insignificant as time went on. They really couldn't imagine how those fucking animals could come up with such strange tricks. Huimao was having a great time. It wouldn't hurt the examinees, of course, it would only hurt them physically. It was having a great time, and it was earning money that it could buy a lot of cat food when it got back. It was a very good deal. Just when the examinees thought that it was finally over, a gray figure flew across the sky. The relaxed nerves of the examinees who had just been teased tensed up once more. Then, they saw the damn fatty who could fly and had caused them a lot of trouble flapping his wings smugly and crouching down on Silen's shoulder. He was even bragging about his achievements to the senior instructors in a very familiar tone. To borrow the words of the instructors at the shooting range not long ago, this was too much. In comparison, Zhen Xingming and the others had a relatively smooth journey. As long as Huimao didn't cause them any trouble, everything would be fine. Haven, Chuck, and the others listened to the complaints of the other examinees after they came out of the testing area. They were glad that they didn't run into that fat cat. No, they should be glad that their roommate was Silin. It was because of Silin that they were able to team up with Zhen Xingming and the other two and avoid being played by that fat cat. The examinees were given some time to rest after the test. After most of the examinees had left, Chuck walked into a room where an old man was waiting for him. It was the same old man that Silin had run into on his way here. He had someone assign Silin to the examinees' dormitory and assigned him a floor. Do you know why I assigned you to that dormitory now? The old man said with narrowed eyes. I do. Thank you. Chuck was very respectful in front of the old man. This was his teacher's teacher, and it was because of this old man that he was recommended to that dormitory and received a lot of benefits. Your success in the test isn't the only benefit. It's also the fact that you got to know Silin. Celine, he's much stronger than you think. Chapter 376. The examinees who had come from afar were a lot more relaxed after the fourth round. They were already here, and all they needed to do was endure the last round of interviews. Interview. This was an important stage for a mentor to choose a student. Whether a student could gain the favor of a mentor and be chosen by their ideal mentor was an important stage for many people. However, for those who had already contacted their teachers, this last round was just a formality. For example, Chuck had been in contact with that old teacher for a long time, and the two of them had a relatively close relationship. As long as Chuck survived the 5 rounds, he would be able to leave with that old teacher after the selection test was over. He wouldn't have to go through the interview and wait for the results like the others. Have you made your choice, Silan? A teacher asked. Silan sorted out the examinee materials in his hands and answered, "Amen, the third interview area." The third interview area? A nearby teacher looked at the examinee materials in his hands and murmured, "There's no special seedling there, is there?" Ivia was assigned to the first interview area. Chuck and a few other examinees with top scores were assigned to the first interview area, so a lot of teachers were fighting to be assigned there. However, there was a limit to the number of teachers in each interview area, so it was impossible for everyone to go there. Other than the first interview area, which was crowded with experts, the other interview areas were evenly distributed. Some of the examinees were at the top of the rankings, and some were at the bottom of the rankings. The teachers who weren't assigned to the first interview area were a little displeased. At the same time, they secretly decided to take care of the examinees they were satisfied with in the next interview area. Guan Feng's incident had dealt a huge blow to the teachers, so unlike in the past, the teachers were very proactive this time. They all wanted to snatch an excellent student and show them off. After the reform, there were indeed quite a number of students who satisfied the mentors. Most of the mentors had already been selected, and the ones who came after were just a formality. Those who could persevere through the fifth examination, no matter how bad their results were still better than those who quit halfway. Some teachers had even contacted some of the students before the selection test, but most of them weren't contacted. They thought that Silan would go to the first interview area because of Guan Feng's support. Who would have thought that the kid would go to the third interview area? Was Guan Feng not planning to accept any more students? It made sense. Guan Feng never cared about the selection test when he accepted students. He'd just take them in as soon as they caught his eye. Sigh, this was the benefit of being in the upper echelons. They could take shortcuts and strike first. Silan walked straight to the interview hall in the third interview area after he picked out the candidates' information from the third interview area. The candidates outside the third interview hall were originally a little dispirited because of what happened in the first area. Those who could enter the first area definitely had no problems, and the tutors were definitely good. However, when they saw Silan enter the third interview area, the dejected people became spirited. This was especially true for those who had done well in shooting. It was as if they were looking at Guan Feng standing right in front of them. A chance. The interview hall was circular. The mentors in charge of the interview hall sat in a circle, and the candidate who came for the interview sat in the middle. The eyes of the mentors were all focused on the candidate. Not everyone could guarantee a good mental state. The aura was too strong, and the pressure was too great. However, very quickly, this sense of nervousness was slowly blurred by the inconceivable questions raised by the tutors. Compared to the questions that they hadn't thought about for their entire lives, the candidates felt like they had lived their lives in vain. The pressure and awkwardness of not being able to answer a question. Those who were mentally stronger could come up with some nonsense, those who were straightforward chose to answer, "I don't know," with a red face, and those who were reserved couldn't come up with a single word even after a long time. Compared to the constipated expressions of the candidates, the mentors were all smiling without saying a word. In reality, the mentors all had a scale in their hearts. They had already made their choice based on the responses of the candidates. They didn't expect the candidates to answer these questions. They just wanted to see the candidates' personalities reflected in the questions. Of course, it was better if the candidates could answer the questions. Some mentors liked to choose those who were good-looking. Among the students they had mentored, the men were handsome and the women were beautiful. All of them were very eye-catching. For example, the mentors who focused on engineering and application liked to recruit men because they had good stamina and could do hard work. Even if they recruited women, they preferred to recruit them because they were strong and healthy. As the candidates finished their interviews one by one, the mentors had already confirmed their names. Silan was the only one who was left blank. Moreover, Celine did not ask too many questions during the interview of the previous candidates. Let the other mentors fight for it. The mentor sitting next to Silen glanced at the blank name list under Silen's hand and thought, Guan Feng really doesn't want any more students. After all, one Tang Qiuqiu was more than enough. There really wasn't a single candidate in this term who could compare to that girl when it came to marksmanship, not even the popular Ivia. The door to the interview hall opened again, and a girl who looked very thin and weak walked in. She looked very ordinary, and her clothes were very simple. She looked a little timid, and the atmosphere inside the hall made her feel very nervous. Although she tried her best to control it, her body couldn't help but tremble uncontrollably. She was also one of the people who had risen to prominence in the return forum. However, she wasn't as open as the previous people. Rong Rua, 20 years old, commoner, owned a small accessory shop. Other information about her was very ordinary. However, Rong Rua's bounty points were very high in the return forum. She could even answer a lot of questions in some non-bounty areas. Rong Rua's education was limited. Later on, she gave up on continuing to study due to her family's financial situation. Although she gave up on studying, she still focused on self-study. Silen chose this interview area mainly because of this person. Silen had paid attention to the people recommended on the return forum. He had observed the replies and movements of these people on the return forum. However, this person, Rong Rua, made Silen very curious, especially the video that Rong Rua put up when she replied to some questions. This was because she opened a small accessory shop. The scale of that accessory shop was pitifully small, not to mention on the planet where she came from, even on the street where she lived. The accessories in the shop were all made by her herself, which saved a lot of costs. Moreover, there was a batch of accessories that were unique to her, which other shops couldn't get their hands on. The shape of those accessories was very regular, as if they were naturally formed. There wasn't even a trace of cutting. If those accessories were machine processed, Silen didn't believe it. The price of a machine processed to that degree was equivalent to the price of several of her small shops. In Rong Rua's small shop, the price of each accessory was very low and very cheap. The aristocrats just heard the price and didn't even bother to look at it. At this moment, Rong Rua, who was standing in the center of the field, couldn't answer a single question. She stood there awkwardly with her head down, not daring to look at the mentors. Many of the mentors weren't interested in asking questions. After all, they were tired after interviewing so many people. When the scene was a little stagnant, Silen spoke. Most of the questions you answered on the return forum were about molecular bond energy. According to your education level, shouldn't you be able to answer these questions? Are they all self-taught? Yes. Yes, Rong Rua was originally very depressed because she couldn't answer a single question from the mentors. Her eyes were red, but she held back her tears. Her father was still waiting in a hotel on a planet in the imperial capital. She knew very well how her parents would feel if she was eliminated. Even if they didn't say it, Rong Rua knew it. Unexpectedly, another mentor asked a question. Before the interview, some people said that there were some hidden meanings in the interview. The more interested the mentors were, the more questions they would ask, and vice versa. If no one was interested in you, no one would want to accept you. They would just ask a few basic questions as a routine, and after that, they wouldn't ask anymore. Rong Rua raised her head and looked at the person who asked the question. She knew the young man sitting there. Many people were talking about him, including herself, and the group of examinees who returned from the return were very grateful to him. When she was in the dormitory, her roommates and the girls in the surrounding dormitories often talked about Silen. Rong Rua felt that if the things everyone talked about were true, such a person shouldn't be able to get close to, right? Seeing Silen looking at her, Rong Rua's face turned even redder. You have a water series of accessories in your shop, can I have a look? Silen asked. When Rong Rua came in, he had noticed the crystal bracelet on Rong Rua's hand. Yes. Yes. Rong Rua hurriedly took off the bracelet on her wrist and handed it over with both hands. Her hands were still shaking when she did so. Silen accepted the bracelet and smiled at Rongrua. Don't be nervous, you did very well. The surrounding mentors looked at Silen strangely. At first, they thought that Silen had only saved her because Rongrua had returned from the return. They didn't think that he would start looking at the bracelet again. Is he interested in this examinee? But, the mentors looked at the ordinary-looking Rongrua again, and then checked her information. She was mediocre in every aspect, or more accurately, she performed very poorly in every aspect, and her marksmanship was the worst of the worst. After 4 rounds of tests, the written exam was the only one that saved her a little bit of face. Guan Feng would never accept a student like this. All the mentors present were certain of this. Silen ignored the strange looks the mentors were giving him and stared at the bracelet on his wrist. The bracelet was made of transparent crystals the size of mung beans connected together, and these small crystals were of different shapes. Some were prismatic, some were star-shaped, and they were all very regular shapes. When he held them in his hand, he felt like he was holding a stream of water. Silen analyzed the composition of the material. Unsurprisingly, most of these crystals were made up of water molecules. The giant sea beast crystals he saw in the underwater city of Sea Paradise were very similar to this one. The discovery made Silen very happy, and the smile on his face grew wider. The mentors around him grew weirder and weirder, and Rongrua grew more and more nervous. She couldn't figure out what Silen was trying to say. Every girl had a Cinderella dream, but Rongrua was much more rational than most girls after experiencing so much. Can you tell me more about this water series accessory? Silen asked. Rongrua opened her mouth to say something, but stopped herself in the end. She seemed to be hesitating about something, and her face was bright red as she clenched her fists tightly. It's fine if you can't answer. Silen handed the bracelet back to her. Do your best. Silen nodded at the person in charge of the interview room, indicating that he was done with his questioning. The person in charge looked at the other mentors and saw that none of them had any intention of answering. He said, next. After Rongrua walked out of the room with a pale face, the mentors asked Silen while the next candidate was still waiting, Silen, is Guan Feng looking to recruit more people? No, Coach Guan doesn't mean that. Plus, he's always the one who does the hiring himself. That's true. The mentors who knew Guan Feng nodded in agreement. But you seem interested in that girl just now. Silen added Rongrua's name to the list in his hand and said jokingly, I'm taking this one. Don't fight me for her. Who the hell would fight you for her? However, out of respect for Silen and Guan Feng, the mentors answered tactfully. Don't worry, we're already at our limit. Any more and we'll run out of energy. It was only at this moment that the mentors remembered that Silen was qualified to mentor students. Although he hadn't graduated yet, he was an honorary scholar of the RAS. Theoretically speaking, he did have the right to mentor students. It was just that he couldn't mentor too many people due to the limited number of spots. There weren't many candidates left, and the interview ended quickly. When everything was over, all the candidates had to do was wait for their communicators to be distributed. Most of the candidates who had passed the 5 rounds of tests were allowed to stay. Many of the mentors from the affiliated schools weren't here yet, so the number of candidates was about the same. On her way back to her dorm, Rongrua saw a lot of candidates who had finished their interviews discussing whether they would be notified by AF1 or AF2. They were gossiping about the mentors while they were at it. They weren't worried because they had good overall scores. Some of them were packing their things and preparing to leave. They were the type who had received the notice beforehand, which meant that they had contacted their mentors beforehand. When she returned to her dorm, the other 4 girls were also discussing the same thing. When they saw Rongrua, they asked, how was it? Did any of the mentors pay special attention to you? Rongrua, you're in the 3rd test area, right? I heard that Silen is there too. Did he ask you any questions? 2 of the girls came over and asked curiously. The other 2 stood where they were with mockery in their eyes. As nobles, They felt that a lowly person like Rong Rua had no right to be here. If it wasn't for the reform of the system, which commoner without a backer would come to this place? However, being able to come here once was not to be regretted. As the communicators were distributed one by one, the first two noblewomen received it, followed by the other two. Rong Rua was the last one to receive it. This time, the system distributed the communicators according to the final score. Rong Rua was the last one to receive it. Seeing that Rong Rua also had a communicator, the other 4 girls looked over. I heard that those who passed the 5 rounds of tests will receive a communicator, one of the noblewomen said. This was the explanation for why Rong Rua was able to receive a communicator. Quick, let's see if it's from AF1 or AF2, and which mentor, one of the girls urged. Rong Rua took a deep breath and turned on the communicator. A holographic screen popped up. On the holographic screen was a huge cat's head. Meow, you're Rong Rua, right? The 5 people in the room were speechless. They had long heard about this cat. It wasn't just the cat's actions in the 4th round. Most importantly, it was Silen's pet. It was Silen's pet. For a moment, the other 4 didn't know what to feel. Hey, say something, Silen. This woman isn't a mute, is she? The gray cat turned its head and shouted loudly in a certain direction. I am. Rong Rua quickly answered. The gray cat on the light screen moved closer to take a look. Its cat head looked even bigger than before and took up the entire screen. You're Silen's student from now on. Amen, you're also my student. I'll protect you no matter what happens. Rong Rua. Hui Mao ignored Rong Rua's silence. He was currently immersed in the joy of having a student too. He continued, Silen doesn't have time right now. I'll come find you later. Then, Hui Mao disconnected the call and looked at Silen, who was on a call outside the door. Silen, I'm going to pick up my disciple. Silen waved his hand to indicate that he understood. Hui Mao jumped out and followed the signal to find Rong Rua. Silen was very busy right now. He was busy with his communicator. Ever since Silen reported Rong Rua's name after the interview, the news that Silen had taken in a girl who didn't even look like much had spread. Many people tried to talk to Silen. Zhen Xingming and the others even came to inquire about the situation out of curiosity. Even Zhenya asked about it himself. It was only after Silen repeatedly stated that he wasn't looking for a wife and was only taking in a student that they suspiciously disconnected the call. Silen. Chuck was conflicted after he said the name. Should he call him mentor? Or should he call him by name? Neither seemed right. Just call him senior brother. We're all in AF1 anyway. Silen put away the communicator and said to Chuck. All right. Senior brother Silen, I'll see you in AF1. Chuck bid farewell to Silen and left. There was a flying car waiting for him outside the dormitory to pick him up. The other people in the dormitory had left a long time ago. Chuck had purposely delayed his departure because he wanted to chat with Silen for a bit. However, Silen kept talking until everyone had left. Silen looked around the empty dormitory room, put on his backpack, and closed the door. Another batch of students had left the dormitory room. After picking up Rong Rua, Silen returned to AF1. Since he was an honorary scholar of the RAS, Silen was given his own lab. He was the one who chose the location of his lab, and Silen's lab was located in a non-teaching area outside of AF1's main campus. Not everyone had a lab and training ground as big as Guanfeng's. Although the treatment wasn't as good as Guanfeng's, Silen was satisfied. This was all he needed right now. Although Silen's lab was a lot smaller than Guanfeng's and the academicians', it was still around 1,000 square meters in size. Before this, Silen hadn't used it because he didn't have an independent project of his own. The zebra virus didn't count because he used Black Viper's stuff. Now that Silen thought that he was starting a new project, it had nothing to do with the virus or guns. It was his own private project, and the results of the project belonged to Silen alone. Of course, he had to bear all the research costs himself. Rong-Rua came to Silen's lab after arranging the dormitory rooms. It was called a lab, but in her opinion, it was more like a factory than anything else. On the way here, Silen had already told Rong-Rua that the main reason he was paying attention to her was because of her technology to create the water series of accessories. As for whether or not Rong-Rua would hand over the technology, Silen didn't force her. Even if Rong-Rua asked for a high price, Silen would still pay for it. However, Rong-Rua didn't ask for a price. Instead, she took out the technology of her own accord. I discovered it by accident, and I'm using it to feed my family. Now that I'm in AF1 and getting paid, there's no need for me to keep this little technology to myself. The reason Rong-Rua didn't mention it during the interview was because she was prepared to give up the water accessory technology if she didn't make it to the selection. Rong-Rua was already very grateful that Silen was willing to let her enter AF1. Rong-Rua had first melted a few ores in order to create a reagent. Then, she melted them with a solvent and heated them up. Due to some matters, she didn't have the time to create the reagent, so she put them all into the compression capsule decompression furnace. When she came back and opened the furnace door, she found that the crystal that came out of the bottle was not the usual prismatic shape, but a dodecahedron. However, this dodecahedron crystal was not stable. After the furnace door was opened, it quickly dissipated. If Rong-Rua hadn't been paying attention to the crystal-like crystals that came out of the bottle, she wouldn't have noticed it. Since then, Rong-Rua started to research in this area. She made crystals of various shapes and sizes. In order to reduce the cost, she finally chose the lowest cost material, water. This was the origin of the water accessory series. That's why I said, there's no need to feel inferior. You're not worse than anyone else. Silen treated Rong-Rua more like a senior, not a mentor. Silen suggested that Rong-Rua close the accessory shop at home first, and reopen it later. Rong-Rua didn't mind it. Business was not good anyway. Those with a bit of money wouldn't be interested in those cheap accessories, and those without money wouldn't bother with those fancy ones. Rong-Rua opened the shop because she accidentally discovered the technique. So, based on the current situation, it wasn't a big deal to close the shop. Silen had already given her a sum of money in advance. It was enough for her family to live a good life, so Rong-Rua wasn't worried anymore. Moreover, because Rong-Rua had entered AF1, her family was treated well by the people on the planet. Silen, when are you going back? Shikai asked this morning. He's ready and waiting to depart. Hui Mao was lying on a shelf, basking in the sun, licking his paws as he spoke. Let's wait for a while. I'll deal with this first. Silen was busy dealing with the things in his hands. He had originally planned to leave in a few days, but plans couldn't keep up with the changes. Rong-Rua's technique had benefited Silen a lot, and at least he had a general direction. Rong-Rua's class hadn't started yet. Originally, she wanted to help Cheto, but she soon realized that she couldn't be of much help when it came to the actual operation. Rong-Rua's technique was like a foundation, and after Silen quickly grasped it, he had extended it to a wider range of branches. Rong-Rua didn't really understand these things, so she had been busy replenishing her knowledge recently. Cheto copied some of the contents from the library for Rong-Rua to read. The things that Cheto could finish reading in an hour were enough for Rong-Rua to read for 10 days. It wasn't that Rong-Rua was slow, it was the speed of a normal person. Not everyone could read as fast as Cheto. 10 days later. Inside a 300 square meter space in Silen's lab, Silen had loaded a special pistol with a bullet that looked like a transparent water droplet. The bullet was shining with water ripples. There was a leaf that had just been plucked from a tree 50 meters away from Silen. Bang! The bullet flew out of the muzzle in Silen's hand and headed straight for the leaf. The leaf that was propped up by a thin needle wasn't penetrated by the bullet. Instead, it was swiftly enveloped by water light. After the water light adhered to the leaf, it grew thicker at a visible rate. Silen looked at the instrument in the lab and saw that the humidity index was dropping rapidly. 5 seconds later, the reaction on the leaf stopped. Hui Mao jumped over and circled around the leaf twice. It is very similar to the one under the sea. Rong Ruo's technique was to synthesize all kinds of small ornaments in water. The success rate was lower than that. Silen had used part of the information in this technique to develop this water bullet. The original leaf was now tightly wrapped in a layer of crystal. It looked like a sealed specimen, just like the sea beast crystal specimen he saw at the underwater city. Hui Mao raised his paw and touched the leaf with his paw. It was cold, but not as cold as ice. Its temperature was like ordinary water, except that it was a lot harder than crystal. Hui Mao took a bite and chewed loudly. Not bad. Want to try the next one? Hui Mao asked. Silen rebalanced the humidity in the lab and switched to a different bullet. This bullet was the same size as the previous one, but the ripples on its surface were faster. Cheto took out a small bottle with a flea inside. Whis had gotten it from King Kong. As expected of King Kong, even the fleas on his body were much bigger than normal ones. How much blood did he drink? After Silen's signal, Cheto opened the bottle cap. Shing! The flea the size of half a thumb rushed out the moment the bottle cap was opened. However, what welcomed it was a bullet covered in ripples. Crack! A hard crystalline block fell to the ground. The flea that was sealed inside was still in the same position as when it leaped up, vivid and lifelike. Hui Mao hurriedly jumped over and took a bite to test the texture. It's much harder than the last one. Then, Silen switched to a few more water bullets and experimented with a couple of more dangerous parasites. The results were pretty good. There were no large sea beasts in the lab for them to experiment with. Although the water bullets weren't perfect yet, and the bullet's speed and hardness needed to be improved, the current results were already very satisfactory. It was a great weapon, but to Whis, it was using a low-level water bomb to make food. In Wheeze's words, it was called sandwiched fish biscuits. Unlike Rong Ruo's accessories, the process of making water bullets into water bullets wasn't easy, and there were many layers of processing that required high precision. Even the lowest level water bomb would cost 3 digits if calculated according to the cost of production. It didn't look like a lot, but it was a huge sum when summed up. Silen didn't have the capital to let Hui Mao squander money just yet. The guy had to use several thousand water bullets to make a bag of fish biscuits. The texture was there, but the money was gone too. After seeing Silen's bill, Hui Mao hesitated for a while and gave up on the idea of using water bullets to make fish biscuits. Well, that was a temporary plan. Meow, when I have the money, I'll use top-grade water bullets to make fish biscuits. Hui Mao vowed. Let's talk about it when you have the money. Silen flicked Hui Mao's cat ears. The money this guy earned from the selection test not long ago was eaten up in half a day. What Hussert said to Hui Mao was true, poverty comes from eating. That night, Hui Mao complained to Black Viper, who was far away on another planet. Black Viper listened to him for a long time. Ever since Black Viper contacted Hui Mao often went to chat with the Big Python, but this was the first time the Big Python didn't know how to answer him. The cat's appetite was too big, and its menu was so wide that it made people's hair stand on end. Not even the Mist Bodhisattva imperial family would research water bullets to make food for Hui Mao. The Big Python didn't tell anyone about the water bullets, not even the Mist Bodhisattva imperial family. He believed that Silen wouldn't threaten the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. However, he did tell the Emperor about it. Silen will become the second Guan Feng. He may even surpass him. Guan Feng's contributions to the Empire weren't just limited to the Purgatory Thunder Snake series. He had designed a lot of military weapons, just that no one knew about it. The day after Hui Mao complained to the Big Python sent someone to deliver a card to him. The amount of money on Carrie's card was enough to make Hui Mao drool, but he still returned the card. I want to make my own money. While the Big Python was admiring the cat's backbone, Hui Mao turned around and pretended to be pitiful in front of Silen. He asked Silen to buy cat food for him because he'd run out of food. Silen poked Huimao's round belly. Your appetite has grown again. Huimao sighed. I've been using my brain too much lately. Mental work takes up a lot of energy. Silen. Fine, I'll pretend I didn't hear that. Silen didn't know what to say to a cat that slept for 20 out of 24 hours. While Silen was perfecting the water bullets, he also taught Rong Rua how to improve the original technology. In the new batch of manufactured accessories, both the purity and brightness had been greatly improved. What he felt when he touched it wasn't the unique coldness of hard crystals, but the softness of water. The first to use these accessories were Zhen Xingming's group. They bought a bunch of accessories from Rong Rua and used them to pick up girls. Originally, they were only supporting Rong Rua out of respect for Silen, but they didn't expect these accessories to be so popular. The three of them even offered to help Rong Rua set up an accessory company. Silen would follow them, and it would be beneficial for Rong Rua to interact more with Zhen Xingming and the others. At the very least, she'd have someone to rely on when Silen wasn't around. Silen was ready to return to the League of Stars after dealing with the water bullets. Shikai had urged him several times, and he'd probably come looking for him if he didn't depart soon. The laboratory was handed over to Rong Rua. She could carry out her crystal dreams here. Zhen Xingming and the others would come here to help as well. They were just bored out of their minds, and it just so happened that this was something new to them, so they came over to play. Silen had deleted all the information related to the water bullets in the laboratory. He wasn't afraid that someone would come and steal it. Also, Silen didn't plan on publicizing the water bullets for now. It wasn't complete enough, and he needed to put it into practice. The best place to do that was the League of Stars. Silen went to see Genya before going to find Shikai. However, Genya wasn't planning on going back with Silen. Although he really wanted to, he couldn't allow a large army to pass through right now. Genya would only burden the other side if he went alone, and Genya didn't want that. Then let's wait a bit longer. It won't be too long, Silen comforted. Genya stared at the sea beast that was playing with Wheeze and smiled. Don't worry about me. You've done well enough. Silen recorded a video of Genya, and what Genya wanted to say was also recorded in it. After leaving Genya's place, Silen, Cheto and Huimao headed to Shikai's base. Guan Feng had released Tang Qiuqiu as well. She was holding a K2 Guan Feng had made for her. Although it was also a K-series gun, it was Tang Qiuqiu's K2. It was Tang Qiuqiu's personal gun, and Tang Qiuqiu's initials were even engraved on the gun. He had obtained all the materials he needed, and he wasn't at ease leaving the 11th squad alone. Although the 11th squad had stayed inside the base, there was no telling if something special would happen to them. When they arrived at Shikai's electronic planet again, Shikai was already waiting for them on top of a space fortress. What have you been up to lately? What took you so long? Shikai asked. Before Silen could answer, Huimao asked from atop Silen's shoulder, What, do you have a problem with that? Shikai curled his lips. I wouldn't dare. He couldn't afford to offend this cat. Hey, Sigma, what's that you're holding? Huimao asked. Inside the space fortress, Sigma was protecting a small box like it was a treasure. Shikai glanced at it, scratched his head, and left in embarrassment to sort out his robots. That's Rufia and Zoe, Sigma said happily. Rufia and Zoe? Huimao jumped down from Silen's shoulder and sniffed the box. Nothing special. Rufia and Zoel were the last two of Sigma's 5 siblings, the 2 poor robots that were destroyed by the Shi family. But what was Sigma holding in his arms right now? Ashes? Huimao asked. Sometimes, this cat just needed to be taught a lesson. It had no filter. Nope. This is Rufia and Zoe, but they're asleep, Sigma said. Huimao was about to get to the bottom of the matter, but Silen smacked him with a fish biscuit. The trip to the Mist Bodhisattva sect wasn't long, but everyone had gained a lot from it. Shimu and Shikai had come up with a plan for a new type of robot. They didn't tell us the specifics, but they just said that we'll know when the time comes. We're leaving now, Chip. We'll see you in a little while. Sigma and Moon said to Chip's hologram from inside the bastion. Good luck. I hope that the next time I see you, Rufia and Zoel will also be awake, said Chip, who had basically controlled the entire electronic planet on the ground. He was glad to see Sigma again. Sigma was still the same Sigma that wouldn't change even after 1,000 years. Could the 5 brothers really be reunited? Chip wasn't sure himself, but if Moon said there was a chance, then there must be a chance. When Rufia and Zoe returned, and when Shikai and Shimu's new plan succeeded, Chip would be able to leave his current state and explore the universe with them. The Shi family preferred to live among the stars. They didn't like to stay in one place for too long. Even Sigma wanted to explore and see more people and things. Faith was the ray of light that kept you going in your darkest hour. It wasn't bright, but it was beautiful in the darkness. It's all in the past. Chip stared at the bastion as it rose into the air. The darkest hour is over, isn't it? Once the bastion was gone, an image appeared on the ground in front of Chip. It was the image Moon had given him. It was a memory of his master. Moon, as long as you live, you can wake them up even if they're asleep. So, no matter how despicable they are, no matter what tricks they pull, you must live. Moon didn't show the hologram to Sigma because he had his doubts. Would they really wake up? It was only after meeting Sigma that Sigma began to believe those words. No matter what the process was, the result was getting better. Why was Moon the most complicated of them all? Because he carried the most burdens on his shoulders. Sillin knew that Moon was carrying a lot of secrets. In fact, he suspected that Moon knew the reason behind the formation of the sea beast specimens in Sea Heaven's underwater city. However, no one could pry the information out of Moon's mouth if he didn't want to say it. Although the Shi clan's peak generation had passed away 1,000 years ago, had the wisdom and achievements of that generation really been lost? Inside the bastion, Sillin watched Moon chat with Huimao, then drag Huimao and Sigma off to watch some X-rays. He closed his eyes. The bastion flew into the depths of the planet, where no one was. Something like a huge storm circle formed in the universe. This time, however, Tang Kakikyu was calm. She didn't go to sleep. As the bastion entered the storm, the instruments in the cockpit showed that the data was much more stable than the last 2 times. Huimao yawned and curled into a ball next to Sillin. He was going to take a nap, and then he'd have to get back to work. Chapter 377. By the time Sillin and the others returned to the base at Sector Z, Mo Heng's fighter was almost done. The materials Sillin brought back made Mo Heng very happy. Previously, some of Mo Heng's designs were left unfinished due to the lack of materials, but now that he had the materials, he could start working on those deleted designs again. Tang Qiuqiu was still crouching in the shooting range all day long, but her training method had changed a little. Guan Feng must have taught her something like this before. Sillin had seen Goryo and the others use a similar training method, and he knew that it was more suitable for the PTS. Sillin didn't know what their new plan was, but judging from the eager look on Shimu's face, it was obvious that it was going to be a great idea. Shimu wasn't the only one who was crouching in the shooting range all day long. Shimu wasn't the only one. He noticed that Moon and Sigma often went in to help out with their precious chest as well. Could it be related to Sigma and Moon's brothers who were killed back then? Sillin didn't have the time to think about it. The first thing he did after returning to his base was check the information Yudi had compiled. Food King Hara's food empire had entered Sector V, and they had contacted Akenthus of the Freedom Army. Both sides were working well together, and the Freedom Army was starting to rise to power. The Freedom Army was already a powerful force to begin with, but it only grew stronger after they joined forces with Food King Hara. Food King contacted me while you were away and asked you to give him a message when you returned. Yudi told Sillin everything that had happened recently and conveyed the Food King's message to him. Is there any news from the Robert family? Sillin asked. Not yet. They seem to have calmed down again. Yudi was very curious about this. Previously, they had been making a huge ruckus, but now they had suddenly stopped. Some people said that the Robert family was afraid of the Hunter Regiment's protests, so they didn't take any further action. Do you believe this? I don't believe it, Yudi shook his head, although I don't know much about them, but from the information I've received, once the people of that family become stubborn, it's very difficult for them to stop. Moreover, they aren't people who are afraid of trouble. I heard that this time, the Robert family's robot army showed great power. Sillin looked at the few brief scenes on the screen, then pointed at the screen and said, "That's it?" The holographic screen showed the scene of the Robert family's robot army swallowing up a small hunting squad. However, there were only a few scenes, and they were too short. Moreover, many of the details were blurred. It was clear that they had been edited. Yes, we can only get these images. There's nothing else. These images seem to have been purposely released by them. Purposely releasing it was for two reasons. Firstly, it was to intimidate, and secondly, it was to create a sense of mystery. Although the Hunter group that had been swallowed had reformed after the Star Alliance had descended into chaos, it was not easy to swallow this Hunter group. Furthermore, only a group of robots had gone to carry out the mission, not humans. There's no way the Robert family could have done it this cleanly. They must have received help from the military and other forces, Yudi said. Sillin understood all of this, but he didn't know who they were, and what their goal was. Was their ultimate goal the four great forces? After Yudi left, Sillin contacted Hara. On the holographic screen, Hara was still the same chubby guy who looked like he could barely walk. "You're busy, aren't you, kid?" Hara looked very satisfied. "It looks like the market you've opened up in Sector V is pretty good." Hara waved his short and fat fingers and smiled until his flesh was sticking out. "You're the one who introduced me to you. They're pretty good. I've actually read their information before, but I can't come into contact with the three young leaders of the Freedom Army at all. They don't trust outsiders, or should I say, they don't trust anyone except the three of them. They don't even trust their own subordinates. That being said, they gave me a lot of face when they heard that you were the one who introduced me to them. Don't be humble. Being overly humble is too fake. With your title as the Food King, coupled with the development needs of the Freedom Army, your cooperation will go smoothly even without my introduction." "I'm not being humble." "Oh right, I wasn't the one who was looking for you a few days ago. It was someone who was looking for you, but it wasn't convenient for her to do so." "Who is it?" "The Freedom Army's Ching." As expected, the call was transferred after Hara said a few words. Sillin could trust Hara's communication, and Ching wasn't a sloppy person either. He could rest assured that the communication was confidential. The Ching that appeared on the holographic screen was wearing a cloak, a hat, and a mask. However, Sillin knew that this person was the one who was on the verge of death. "I'm sure you know who I am already. Thank you for your help last time." It was impossible to tell if the person on the holographic screen was male or female, but she didn't hide her identity at all. Anna and Blue were both her names. No one in Sector V could guess her double identity and double secrecy, and not even the Andrea family could guess it. It was obvious that Blue had disguised herself very well. "I'm glad that you've recovered. Is there something you need from me?" Sillin cut straight to the chase without beating around the bush. "There is. However, whether or not it will work depends on whether or not you have the intention." Ching's tone was a little mysterious. "I'm all ears." Ching took out a palm-sized projector and pressed a button. A planet appeared on the projector, and judging from the data flashing at the side of the projector, it wasn't a big planet. Although it wasn't big, there were some tiny flashing dots of light on the rotating projection. Sillin raised an eyebrow, an energy ore. "That's right." Ching turned off the projector and continued, "This is a planet we discovered by accident. However, a few forces are already paying attention to it. You're from Sector V. That's indeed the case. In the past, because that place was an uninhabitable zone and the magnetic field in the surrounding star zone was often abnormal, everyone avoided that area. Later, after someone rushed in and came out alive, that planet began to attract attention. How many people are watching it? Sillin asked. At least 5 forces including us. A pause later, Qing continued, all of them are from Sector V. Most of the people in Sector V were not afraid of death. If they really went crazy, it would be a real headache. However, the investigation information that Qing took out next moved Sillin greatly. Or rather, it didn't matter if it was a hunter, a merchant, or a soldier. If my estimation is correct, the purest part of the energy ore on this planet is comparable to a Lillo's white knight. Qing's tone was filled with uncontrollable excitement. This was what drove people crazy. The energy ore called white knight inside a Lillo's cage had been divided up by the military and political people a long time ago, and the hunters didn't get much. Although everyone said that white knight was replaceable, there was no reason not to eat such a big cake when it was placed in front of them. Carrie and the others would probably go crazy if they knew about this. What do you think? Interested in a partnership? Qing asked. Although the Freedom Army's rise was fast, there were a lot of people eyeing that planet this time. If they really clashed head-on, the Freedom Army would suffer a lot of losses. If they were to shrink because of this planet, there was no telling when they would be able to recover. After all, there were too many people who wanted to kill the Freedom Army while they were weak. But if they could ally with Sillin, then things would be different. There were a lot of energy ores on the planet anyway, so sharing a share with Sillin wasn't a bad idea. Just like Akenthus said, they could return a favor. When do you guys move? This was Sillin's biggest concern. They still had a lot of preparation work to do. 15 to 20 days according to the galactic calendar. Qing answered. During this time, all parties were making preparations to go to that planet. If they didn't make perfect preparations, they might die in space before they reached their destination. Give me half a day. Sure. Sillin had half a day to consider whether he should accept this job or not. He went to check on Mo Heng's progress. The fighters were in the final stages of finishing up. Sillin gathered all the team members for a meeting and asked for everyone's opinion. As expected, the moment they heard that there was an energy ore comparable to White Knight, Carrie and the others became excited and rubbed their palms together. The others were about the same. About the fighters, Mo Heng waved his hand. You don't have to worry about that. 10 days is more than enough time. The rest of the finishing work doesn't have to be done here, it can be done in the starship's warehouse. What about you guys, Shikai? Sillin looked at Shikai, who was rubbing his chin thoughtfully. We're fine with it. The starship is fully equipped anyway. Shikai didn't just bring back the materials from the Mist Bodhisattva sect. He also prepared several sets of equipment. One for the base, one for the space fortress, one for the Little 11 starship, and the rest for backup. Hui Mao bounced on the side. That's settled then. Sillin, we're definitely going. That's all money, we can sell it even if we don't use it for ourselves. Sillin patted the restless cat's head and said, then get ready. I'll let everyone know once I'm done. After the meeting was adjourned, Mogaz gathered together with Carrie and the others. Sigh, Carrie, I'm starting to think that joining the 11th squad was a wise choice. Not only do we have a custom-made fighter, armor, luxurious food, and now we're even running into a top-tier mission like this. It really makes my blood boil. Sillin is such an amazing captain. Carrie chuckled. Why else would Sillin be called the captain? The 11th squad wouldn't exist without him. Xiao Shang patted Mogaz on the shoulder. Do your best. You'll get a bigger bonus if your results are good, you know. After Sillin replied to Green, they came to an agreement and set a time for Sillin to meet up with them at Sector V at the coordinates Green had given him. On the other side, Green had ended his call with Sillin. He looked at Akenthus and Enraisin and said, "It's done." Enraisin wiped his gun and said, "Isn't the 11th squad a new squad? And it's just a vanguard sub-squad. It can't even be called a fleet. I'm afraid that they'll become a burden when the time comes." Akenthus shook his head. "Sillin is a strange man. The 11th squad may be small, but Sillin is a very capable man. Back at Sector H, I thought he was a member of some big family or something. There's no way we could have escaped so easily otherwise. That's what I'm curious about as well. He's a hunter from the Big Four. Although he's just a sub-squad member, not even a sub-squad leader can mobilize all of Sector H's personnel, can he? Plus, he's acquainted with Food King," Green said. Akenthus paused for a moment before continuing, "I didn't ask him to join this operation just to return a favor. I wouldn't have made this decision if they were weak." "Then why?" Enraisin stopped wiping his gun and looked at Akenthus. "During my conversation with the Food King, he revealed something. Sillin is connected to that side as well." Akenthus raised 3 fingers and pointed at the sky. Both Green and Enraisin understood the gesture. It represented sectors A, B, and C. The fact that they were able to receive help from people from those 3 sectors meant that their evaluation would go up a whole new level. Inside the 11th Squad's base. Inside Moon's small room, a set of high-quality audio and video equipment was playing a small X-ray. However, Moon's attention wasn't on it. Now that Moon had controlled himself from interfering with other equipment while he was thinking, the reason he turned on the audio and video equipment was so that he wouldn't be discovered by anyone else in the base. "Moon, Shikai has produced the complete plan. Once it's complete, the new robots will be produced very soon," Sigma said while flying in with the box in his arms. Moon rubbed his chin and moved his fingers. Then, he turned to Sigma and asked, "Are you happy with the 11th Squad, Sigma?" "Of course I am. The 11th Squad has you, Whis, Cheto, and now the descendant of the Shi family. Sillin has helped me a lot as well. Everyone in the 11th Squad is great. Right now, I'm just waiting for Ruifia and Zoel to wake up and Chip to recover. Then, the 5 of us can join the 11th Squad," Sigma replied with a tilt of his head. The blue bars on his face narrowed. "Of course I am." Moon spread his arms like he was stretching himself. Then, he rose to his feet. Where are you going, Moon?" Sigma followed closely behind him. "I'm going to talk to Sillin about our pay." I don't think that's a good idea, we're all living here. I might be the one who built most of the base, but, no buts. Let's go check your orchard. Don't let the trees die when we depart, and bring more fresh fruits with us." Sillin was a little surprised by Moon's arrival. He was reading through the information Ching had given him, and it was no wonder that the environment around the planet wasn't very good. No wonder so many people had gone in there and never returned. Even the Freedom Army had only probed the planet from afar. They hadn't actually entered it. Among the information Ching sent him, Sillin noticed that none of the people who went in search of the planet had ever returned. The ones who escaped only stayed on the planet's surface. The survivors brought back news that the people who went in met the spirits, so they couldn't come back. That was why everyone was spending so much time preparing for the expedition. If they weren't prepared, they would only die. They didn't believe in ghosts. It was either a strange species or an illusion. Sillin didn't put the information away when Moon entered the room. Instead, he spread it out on the ground. "What is it?" "I have something to tell you. It's about this planet." Sillin touched the projector next to his arm with a finger, and the image of the planet appeared in front of him. At first glance, it looked no different from any other non-habitable planet, but upon closer inspection, there were a lot of shining spots on the planet due to reflections. Moon tilted his head and looked at Sillin. He seemed to be curious about Sillin's words. "Yes, it's about this planet." Moon flew to the side of the projection and looked at the planet. Although there were only flashing lights on the surface, Scylla could feel that Moon was looking at the planet seriously. White Knight is actually not the name of the energy ore. Scylla looked at Moon, who was staring at the planet intently. He didn't say anything and waited for Moon to continue. White Knight was once called the White Spirit. Spirit, Moon raised a finger, and the tip of the finger spread out, projecting an image. It was a girl in white. Her skin color, hair color, pupil color, and eyelashes were all white. Her white hair that reached her ankles fluttered as if there was a wind blowing. There was a childlike innocence in her eyes, but deep inside this innocence was indifference, mechanical indifference. She doesn't have a physical body. She's just a program, a living program. Master told me that before the 5 of us appeared, they had done many experiments, and the best result was White Knight. However, because she couldn't make a physical body like us, she was left there to guard the remaining energy ores. When Moon said this, Scylla understood. The top-grade energy ores that Qing mentioned were actually the White Knight, in Alilo. The man-eating specter on the planet mentioned in the information was actually a guardian, created by the Shi family back then. Then why are you telling me this now? Scylla asked. Moon never took the initiative to talk about it. Even when Scylla mentioned the planet, Moon didn't come over immediately. He must have thought about it for a while before deciding. I want to bring White Knight over. I don't care who the energy ores belong to, I hope you can help us bring White Knight back in one piece. How? When the time comes, I will negotiate with White Knight. We haven't met, but I have a message left by Master. Just don't destroy this area. Moon pointed to a place on the planet. That was the place with the most energy ores. It was not easy to protect that place from being destroyed. I'll try my best. Thank you. Moon looked at Scylla and said mysteriously, White Knight is very powerful. There is a reason why he was called a ghost. So, if you can bring White Knight over, it will be good for you. Chapter 378. It didn't matter what kind of thing Moon was referring to as the White Spirit. The most important thing right now was to get everything ready. After Moon told Scylla about White Knight, he also told him about the planet's surroundings. Although Moon had never been there himself, the information stored in his memory hadn't faded even after 1,000 years. It was of great help to Scylla. After getting the information, Scylla adjusted the parameters of the base's simulated training ground so that Carrie and the others could get used to it as soon as possible. That way, it would be easier for them to get to their destination. Scylla also shared some of the information Moon had given to Achenthus. After all, they were going to be working together. Scylla's side didn't have many people, so they might need the Freedom Army's help when they got to their destination. Hunters were always in a hurry. They weren't people who could stay in the same place for long. After being cooped up in the base for so long, Carrie and the others were itching to go out. Before this, they were doing hard labor around Mo Hung because of the space fighter. Now that the fighter was ready and they had a mission, they spent most of their time training in the simulated training ground. With their gene rank and good physical fitness, they quickly adapted to the environment Scylla had set up. This time, they didn't wear normal protective suits. Instead, they wore armor made by Shimu. Perhaps the next mission would be the time when the armor would come into play. They were just getting used to it, so they were looking forward to the real hunting ground. They left the base on a starship and headed to the coordinates Scylla and Achenthus had agreed to meet. The fighter was almost complete. Mo Hung told Carrie and the others to try it out when they had time. He wanted to see if there was anything they weren't satisfied with. If there was, they could modify it so that they wouldn't get into trouble on the battlefield. Carrie and the others were overjoyed by the fighter jets Mo Hung had created. These were fighter jets that belonged to them and were not for public use. Every fighter jet was designed and built according to their personal characteristics and preferences, unlike the bulk-bought fighter jets they had seen in other squadrons. Other than the design, the materials used to build these space fighters were incredibly hard to come by. If Silen hadn't obtained a batch of rare materials from the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, these space fighters might not have been able to achieve the results Mo Hung was satisfied with. As for where Silen got the materials from, Mo Hung didn't ask. Silen had Silen's secrets. He respected that. Lying on the shelf, Hui Mao closed his eyes and thought about his next move. He was no longer the ignorant cat that followed Silen out of the base, and there was no need for him to restrain himself anymore. If he wanted to fight, he could fight, no matter the form. As for those eccentric researchers, Hui Mao wasn't afraid of them anymore. Now that he had someone to rely on, he wasn't afraid of them. Although Hui Mao wasn't happy with the fact that this batch of energy ores had to be split equally with the Freedom Army, he had no choice but to endure it. They were partners after all, and the worst that could happen was that they would take the lion's share. However, Hui Mao wouldn't allow a third party to interfere. The other forces of Sector V could just eat shit. Before they met up with the Freedom Army, Silen explained the operation plan to everyone. The place Yu mentioned was a key protected area, and since Silen had promised Yu, he would prioritize it over everything else. He would protect White Knight even if the energy ores were occupied or destroyed. Sector V's reputation in the League of Stars wasn't good. It was a former colonial sector and a region known for its crimes. After the League of Stars fell into chaos, Sector V, which hadn't been completely controlled by the military yet, took this opportunity to develop wantonly. Although the flames of war raged everywhere, there was one area in Sector V that very few people went to, and that was the area Blue had mentioned to Silen. There were basically no habitable planets in that area, and there weren't many mineral deposits on the planets at the edge of that area. Coupled with the harsh environment of the universe, very few people would venture into that area. The equipment required to enter that area was relatively high, and high-level equipment was always linked to a huge amount of money. Even the rich colonists of Sector V wouldn't want to waste their money to explore that seemingly empty area. That was why the planet containing the best energy ores could be preserved to this day. Otherwise, it would have been emptied a long time ago. When the starship arrived at the agreed coordinates, the Freedom Army was already waiting for them. There were no large starships or spaceplanes, only small and medium-sized spaceplanes scattered around. One reason was because of the Freedom Army's financial limitations, and the other was because this lineup allowed them to move more efficiently. The spaceplanes weren't fancy, but they were all heavily armed models. They looked full of killing intent, and some of the spaceplanes even had holes and wounds caused by cannon bombardment. You fought already? Silen looked at Achenthus on the light screen. They're just some annoying minions, no big deal. Achenthus said. The murderous intent in his blood-red eyes hadn't faded completely yet. Silen noticed that Blue and Enrainer were standing behind Achenthus. Aren't you afraid that something unusual might happen inside the base? Achenthus smiled and didn't answer. Silen believed that they should have already made arrangements. However, the three of them always seemed to move together. Silen didn't ask too much about the Freedom Army. After discussing their next move with Achenthus, the two of them flew towards the planet together. In the Freedom Army, many people looked at this unfamiliar starship and discussed it. They didn't understand why they had to call others for an operation. Although the starship looked good, war wasn't about whose flying tool was beautiful. On this side, the Freedom Army members were discussing Silen and the others in their spaceplanes. The spaceplanes were also communicating with each other through their communicators. In the end, just as they were mocking the unfamiliar starship, an angry voice sounded. Fuck you, you're the flashy ones. You're the embroidered pillows. You're the fucking trash. The three leaders in Achenthus's spaceplane looked at each other, surprised that their own communication channel would hear the voice of the other person. Silen finally spoke up after the gray cat had yelled for a while, I'm very sorry. One of our team members is a little too hot-tempered, but forgive me for being blunt, but your communication security measures are seriously terrible. Hearing Silen's words, Achenthus contacted the people in charge of the spaceplanes. Each spaceplane was a team with a team leader. Acanthus asked the team leaders to check their communicators and communication network and turn on the security facilities. No matter what, they couldn't be careless. Although Huimao's shout made the Freedom Army unhappy, it calmed down a lot. I didn't mean to hear it. It's their communication network that's wide open. They didn't even set up low-level security. You can't blame me for that, Huimao said while licking his claws. He was originally not satisfied with giving a part of the energy mine to the other party. Now that he heard those people talking bad about him, it would be strange if he didn't flip out. Sillin patted Huimao's head. Alright, don't waste time paying attention to the Freedom Army. Pay attention to other places further away to see if there are any abnormalities. For example, someone who isn't part of the plan. Someone who isn't part of the plan. Huimao flicked his ears. He didn't quite understand Sillin's meaning, but since Sillin had said so, he had no choice but to pay attention. The space environment in this area wasn't very good. There were a lot of rocky areas, and there were often strong ion storms. As a result, their speed was a lot slower than usual. The route Sillin had chosen was based on the information Moon had provided him. It was also one of the easiest routes out of all of them. Although they ran into a lot of trouble, they still successfully reached their destination coordinates ahead of the other forces in Sector V. The Freedom Army was very happy about this. Can you contact White Knight? Sillin looked at Moon. Moon shook his head. Not yet. I need to enter the planet to communicate with her. Who are you guys talking about? Carrie moved closer to Cheto and asked. Moon tilted his head. We're talking about Cheto's girlfriend. Cheto. Why didn't he know when he found himself a girlfriend? Oh, not far away, a group of people moved closer to Cheto. Even Mao, who usually didn't pay much attention to gossip, couldn't help himself. They were just too curious. Cheto's girlfriend? A robot's girlfriend? Alright, everyone, get ready to move. You'll know when the time comes. Also, do your best and don't embarrass the 11th squad. Sillin patted the group of people who had gathered around him and said. Carly and the others hesitated for a moment, but in the end, the mission was more important. That being said, I'm really curious. We're ready to land, Alkenthus said on the screen. Alright. Sillin gestured to everyone, and they all got to work. The 11th squad's starship was left outside the planet. Since they had the super AI Little 11, they didn't have to worry about piloting the starship even if there was no one around. Speaking of which, space fighters flew out of the starship one after another. Their streamlined bodies and shape were clearly different from normal fighters, and they flashed across the dark universe like phantoms. Alkenthus stared at the image on the screen. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't envious, but he was still surprised. From what they knew, Vanguard didn't have a fighter like this in their B squadrons other than their famous Freedom ship. The detectors couldn't detect anything. None of our scanning methods detected anything. Inderson pointed at the image on the screen. All they saw was the enemy's fighter flying out of the starship, disappearing in a flash, and then vanishing into thin air. Unfortunately, the detectors on the spaceplane didn't detect anything at all. Instead of piloting a fighter, Sillin piloted a small spaceplane and carried Mo Heng, Cheto, Tang Qiuqiu, Xueqiu, and Qi Feng out of the planet. Old Mo was the one who strongly requested to tag along. He was very curious about this planet, and he wanted to see the alluring top-grade energy ores there. There weren't any plants on the planet, only rocks and mountains embedded with energy ores. After the Freedom Army landed, they put on their protective suits and started mining. Since the other forces hadn't arrived yet, they decided to dig a bit first. Meanwhile, Sillin parked the spaceplane at the place Moon told him to. After opening the hatch, Moon and Sigma flew out of the spaceplane. While the Freedom Army was digging excitedly, a white light suddenly appeared around them. It was the energy ores that didn't glow themselves. It illuminated the dimly lit area for a long time. Who are you? A gentle voice entered their ears. Then, A white figure appeared on top of the oars. They were all the same, and their movements were exactly the same. It almost looked like they were clones. A snow-white white knight was sitting on top of the oars. Her long hair and long skirt were flowing in the wind as she stared at the miners. She was twirling a strand of her white hair with one hand and combing it with a comb with the other. Wraith! Someone exclaimed. Since Alkenthus had told them not to attack if they saw a wraith and that someone else would deal with it, all they had to do was dig as hard as they could. That was why the Freedom Army didn't open fire immediately when White Knight appeared. Although that was the plan, when everyone saw this white figure, they all felt a chill down their spines. Be it the Freedom Army soldiers who were closer to White Knight or Carrie's group who were patrolling in fighter jets, they couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over their bodies. Not fearing death was one thing, but the fear of seeing a wraith was another. What the hell is this? A projection? After White Knight appeared, Moon started communicating with her using the method his master left behind. Although White Knight, Sigma, and Moon had never met each other before, they were all created by the Shi family in the same area. Plus, Sigma took out some information that belonged to his master. It didn't take long for them to communicate with each other. It wasn't long before a passageway opened up at Moon's location. After greeting Scylla, Moon and Sigma descended into the passageway. The passageway closed behind them, and White Knight's projection disappeared. Now that the wraith was gone, the Freedom Army soldiers returned to their mining. They were curious, but the energy in front of them was far more attractive. Just as Alkenthus was wondering why Scylla hadn't made a move yet, he saw a slightly larger spaceplane land. Many big guys that looked like mining robots walked out of the spaceplane and began mining with familiarity before transporting them into the spaceplane. Alkenthus glanced at Scylla, who was still sitting inside the spaceplane. He had to admit that he was jealous. Although the 11th Squadron had fewer people, they had more robots. Mining and other tasks were done by the robots. They were all professionals and could dig quickly. They were not slower than the Freedom Army. Huimao wasn't the type to stay put for long. It ran out the moment Sigma and Moon came out of the spaceplane, broke off large chunks of energy ores with its claws and tossed them to the transport robots. This is all money. It can be exchanged for tons and tons of cat food. The soldiers of the Freedom Army were very curious about this cat that did not need to wear protective clothing and could run nimbly in such a harsh environment with its round body. However, no matter how curious they were, they could not lose to this cat. The Freedom Army soldiers moved even faster when they saw the cat doing its best to break off the oars. Suddenly, the gray cat's claws froze in the middle of plucking the energy ores. It looked towards the sky. Scylla, they're here. Meow my ass. Carrie, knock them down one by one. The first thought that came to the Freedom Army people's minds when they saw the gray cat standing on top of the mine with its paw raised high like it was pointing at the world, so this is the cat that was eavesdropping at the time. Their second thought, this cat can talk. Their third thought, who's here? It didn't take long for them to realize that it was the other Sector V forces. Prepare for battle. Some of the Freedom Army soldiers stayed behind to continue mining, while the rest prepared for battle. Piloting a fighter in the sky, Carrie's face twitched again and again when he heard Huimao's roar. This cat is getting more and more arrogant. The 11th Squad's starship was in stealth mode and some distance away from the newcomers. That was why they didn't notice that there was a starship parked outside the planet. Just like the Freedom Army, the 11th Squad was made up of spaceplanes, and they were annoyed that someone had arrived before them. That was why they started attacking before they even landed, because they all wanted to take everything for themselves. Large craters were blasted on the ground by the artillery fire. Rock fragments were sent flying everywhere, mixed with some fragments of energy ores. Carrie and the others who had been hovering in the sky started firing as well. Their bodies flashed past them. The enemy was almost unable to lock onto their target because they were hit by a blast before they could even lock onto their target. Carrie and the others might look like a mess, but they all had a plan and worked well together. Inside the spaceplane, Scylla could hear Carrie and the others' jokes and curses through the communicator. Artillery fire interweaved in the sky, densely packed like fireworks. However, fireworks wouldn't cause so many broken parts to fall because of being hit. Some were from the Freedom Army, and some were from the newcomers. While the Freedom Army was busy fighting in the sky, Huimao didn't stop mining. He ignored the fighters in the sky and busied himself with the digging robots. A couple of fighters were about to attack him when they saw his mining activity, but they were attacked by the phantom-like fighters before they could do anything. Huimao was fearless because he had Carrie and the others' cover. Of course, Huimao wouldn't be afraid even without Carrie and the others' cover. The cannonballs couldn't hurt it for now anyway. More people are coming, Cheto said. Another group of people was flying towards them from the sky. However, they didn't charge at them immediately. Instead, they waited outside for a while. It looked like they wanted to wait until the two sides fought each other to the death before attacking. Unfortunately, the reality didn't allow them to do so. This time, it wasn't just one side. The other side had arrived as well, and more people were coming one after another. Everyone knew about the same time, and the time to prepare was almost the same. If the Freedom Army hadn't changed their flight path at Scylla's suggestion, they would have arrived at the same time as these people. The chaotic battle had begun. The normally dead planet was now covered in flames and debris. The battle in the sky was fierce, but because everyone was staring at the energy ores on the ground, their ground forces quickly landed and began fighting for resources. Let's go. Scylla called out to the people inside the spaceplane and walked out of the hatch. Chapter 379. Scylla and the others didn't join the melee. Instead, they stood guard around the area Moon had pointed out and cleared out anyone who entered the area. Tang Qiuqiu's efficiency had increased a lot since she gained the Purgatory Thunder Snake. Coupled with Tang Qiuqiu's strong mental fortitude, she was able to blow up a dozen or so people's heads in the blink of an eye without batting an eyelid. The people who came over were all wearing protective suits. It slowed down their movements quite a bit, and before they could even aim at Tang Qiuqiu, they had already lost consciousness. While pulling the trigger, Achenthus took the opportunity to glance at Scylla's direction. What he saw immediately filled him with envy, jealousy, and hatred. The Freedom Army and the newcomers were wearing similar protective suits. At first, he didn't think much of it since they were all wearing the same type of protective suits. But now that he saw the 11th squad, he couldn't help but feel sorry for himself. Even someone with the best genes and physique couldn't avoid some restrictions when wearing protective suits. However, Scylla and the others were clearly wearing something different. Not only did he block the stray bullets, he didn't restrict the newcomers' movements at all. Looking at the little girl jumping up and down, then looking at the big fat bear wearing armor beside the little girl, and then looking at what they and the others were wearing, they felt really ashamed. It was one thing for their fighters to be outdated, but even their protective suits were outdated. No, they should be called armors. It would be a lie to say that they weren't jealous. Achenthus, Qing, and the others couldn't help but think that if the Freedom Army had this kind of equipment. Scylla cleared out the newcomers, and every time he fired a shot, a couple of people would die. Right now, he was using a Purgatory Thunder Snake K instead of an S. K was more than enough to deal with these people. Huimao ignored the chaotic battle and continued to mine its energy ores. Boom boom, fighter jets kept crashing, and some spaceplanes had blown up and fallen to the ground. Some people didn't manage to dodge in time and were smashed into meat paste or caught in the explosion. Not only did they have to pay attention to the falling objects, but they also had to avoid the shots of fighter jets and the attacks of various people. Almost everyone on the ground was in a state of high tension, and for the people of Sector V, this tension was not fear, but excitement. The flames of war, the sounds of explosions, and the spurting of blood caused them to tremble with excitement. Scylla clearly sensed that those who had been cleaned up did not fear death on the battlefield at all before they died. Once they were immersed in such a hail of bullets and bombardment, they would enter a different state. They were just like the men of sacrifice trained by many families and forces. In their current state, even if White Knight came out, these people wouldn't be able to suppress their fear at all. People had always avoided the people of Sector V. It was because people who grew up in the war-torn zones of Sector V were numb to many things. Right now, these people no longer cared about the top-grade energy ores that even outsiders would go crazy over. There was only killing and venting in their hearts. When faced with Scyllane's muzzle, they didn't even try to dodge. When he first joined Vanguard, someone once told Scyllane that there was not much of a sense of accomplishment even if you managed to kill all of the madmen of Sector V in the end. In fact, you might even feel like you had just killed a moving log. While Scyllane was cleaning up the people who had entered the area, Shikai's voice came from the communicator. "Do you need me to send a robot to help you?" Scyllane looked around and above him and said, "Not yet." "How much longer do you need?" 5 minutes, no, 3 minutes. Rough or precise? Precise. All right. 3 minutes should be enough. He had just ended the call with Shikai when Ayu's voice came from the communicator again. "Scyllane, White Knight said that someone had been here before us. However, they stayed on the other side of the planet and were not discovered by the detectors under the cover of the planet's magnetic field." "Someone else? Do you know who they are?" Scyllane said while firing at the people who stepped into the area. Not exactly humans. Most of them are robots." "The Robert family?" "I think so." "Alright, I got it. How are things on your side?" "I'm communicating with White Knight right now. I'm also arranging the settings here so that White Knight can leave this place." You seem to be pretty busy." Scyllane could hear the sound of a device being touched from the other end of the communicator. "You guys continue. I'll take care of things outside." "Alright." Scyllane was very puzzled when he learned about this planet. Green said that the people of Sector V had discovered it by chance, and although this explanation was plausible, Scyllane was still skeptical. The chances of the people of Sector V coming here and leaving alive without knowing the environment and conditions of this planet were very small. It wasn't that Scyllane looked down on the people of Sector V, but they saw things from a different perspective. Moreover, the colonists here were too busy taking refuge after the League of Stars had descended into chaos to pay attention to this unknown area. At a time when the forces of Sector V were busy fighting for territory, who would come to this place and discover this planet unknowingly? Or rather, who was the one who discovered this planet first and revealed it to them? From the looks of it, it was the Robert family. No wonder the Robert family had been quiet all this time. They had their eyes on this place since a long time ago. However, they didn't just want the energy ores on this planet, they also wanted to use this bait to eliminate the elites and leaders of the few influential forces in Sector V. This way, not only would they be able to obtain these top-quality energy ores, they would also be able to clean up Sector V and provide benefits to a certain army corps behind Robert. 2 birds with 1 stone. "Carrie, come back to me in 1 minute. At the same time, clean up the area I've marked out." Scyllane informed Carrie and the others about the new operation plan. Then, he contacted Alkenthis and explained the new arrangements. He called back Chifeng who had already run far away, and had the rest of the team get ready. By the time Scyllane's countdown reached 15, the team members were already at the location Scyllane had ordered. The fighters in the air had lowered their altitude and were flying around Scyllane. Scyllane gestured towards Achenthis. Achenthis nodded, indicating that he was ready as well. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A beam of light rose into the sky and unfurled like an umbrella, enveloping the area Scyllane had marked out. An energy shield. How did they get such a big energy shield? It took a lot of energy to support an energy shield like this, but they were in a mining area, and a top-quality energy ore was just around the corner. All they needed to do was set up a little. Shikai and Shimu had already begun setting up the energy shield when they arrived at the mining area, and they were very satisfied with its performance. In other words, they were very satisfied with the top-quality energy ores here. The shield's resistance coefficient was pretty good. The energy shield's appearance had lightened everyone's workload. All they needed to do was clear out the enemies within the energy shield's range, and the enemies outside the energy shield wouldn't be able to break in for the time being. Alkenthis stared at the chaotic battle outside the energy shield, and then at Scylla and the others. He suddenly realized that it was skill and talent that determined how far a team could go. It wasn't how many people were unafraid of death or how many good genes they possessed. The Freedom Army had been a rank lower than Scylla's 11th squad ever since they ran into each other. Aiken thus understood this very well, and the Freedom Army needed technical support if they wanted to continue to grow and rise. In an almost isolated environment like Sector V, the Food King's support alone allowed the Freedom Army to grow much faster than the other rising forces at the same time. What if they obtained other technologies as well? While Alkenthis was lost in thought, Inderson elbowed him and pointed his chin in a certain direction. Alkenthis looked in that direction and saw Cheto, who wasn't wearing any protective gear, pulling a large piece of energy ore out of the ground with his bare hands. Alkenthis and the others had never seen through Cheto before. Scylla was the 11th Squad's commander after all, and even if he didn't have detailed information on him, he was at least able to find out something about him. But Cheto, on the other hand, didn't have any information on him at all. Or rather, none of it was real. In fact, they didn't even know if he was human or not. He couldn't be human without protective gear in such an environment, could he? The people outside the energy shield attacked it angrily, but they couldn't break through it in a short time. Moreover, there were a lot of energy ores inside the energy shield, so there was no way the energy shield would run out of energy and retreat. That was why the fighting outside grew fiercer and fiercer in order to vent their frustrations. At first, there were fewer and fewer people outside the energy shield. When the leaders finally got their subordinates under control and decided to stop fighting, beams of high-energy beams shot straight at them and swept away the people in the air like brooms. The fighters and spaceplanes let out deafening explosions, and some whose wings were cut off fell straight to the ground. But before they could hit the ground, another beam swept over them and cut them into pieces. "They're here." Scylla looked at the direction of the beams and saw a group of robots flying towards them from the dark sky. "Is that the so-called Robert family's mechanical army?" Shikai asked. "That's them." After the rebellion, the Robert family's robots had upgraded very quickly. It was a testament to their title as the Mech Empire. The people outside the energy shield were quickly cleaned up, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of wreckage. As for the people who were originally on the ground, they were suddenly killed by the robots with sharp metal cutting wheels that appeared out of nowhere. Blood was flung out along with the rotation of the metal piece, spraying on the wreckage that was still emitting fire and black smoke, making a sizzling sound. No matter how numb the people of Sector V were, they had no choice but to retreat in defeat against these cold robots. More and more robots appeared on the ground, and more surrounded the energy shield in the air. Some of the robots still looked human, but the strangely shaped weapons they were wielding showed that they were different. After the robots had surrounded the energy shield, a spaceplane flew over. The communicator in Achenthis's hand rang. It was a call request. After pressing the call button, Achenthis placed the communicator next to him so that everyone could see the other person's image. When the call was connected, a person's figure appeared on the screen. However, it wasn't the Robert friends Scylla knew, but someone else from the Robert family who looked a little similar to friends. The person didn't seem to be looking at the communicator. Instead, he was staring at the enormous energy shield. TSK, you guys sure surprised me." Achenthis didn't answer. They knew who the other person was now. Only the Robert family could possess such a mechanical army. "But I'm sorry, but don't think that you're safe hiding inside the energy shield. I may not have brought many mechanical soldiers with me this time, but it's enough to take out all of you. As for this energy shield, it's nothing." As the man's voice faded, the energy barrier above began to flicker. Soon, the energy barrier began to thin. "The energy shield has been affected," Carrie and the others exclaimed. At the same time, they were ready to charge out at any moment. However, after the energy shield had gradually faded, it brightened up again and returned to its original state. Shikai controlled the device in his hand and sneered at the figure displayed on the communicator. Nothing. The person on the screen looked a little flustered, his face red and white. In the end, he waved his hand and said, "You may have some ability, but how long can you last against my mechanical army? I'll show you how your defenses crumble step by step, and how you'll be destroyed." As soon as that person finished speaking, another voice rang out. "You want to destroy, where?" A white figure appeared next to the image, standing face to face with the person on the screen. "Guardian, we meet again." The person on the screen frowned when he saw Byakuya appear. Obviously, he didn't expect Byakuya to appear at this time. There was such a fierce battle here, so why didn't he appear? Byakuya didn't respond to this kind of nonsense like, "We meet again." Instead, he stared straight at the person on the screen. Under the gaze of this pair of white pupils, the person couldn't help but look away. "Although we avoided you before, it doesn't mean that we're afraid of you. You're just a failed product that hasn't taken shape yet. Is that so?" The white figure in front of the communicator faded away, but the next moment, in the aircraft outside the energy shield, a white figure appeared on the screen in front of the person on the screen. Then, the same figure appeared on the screen next to it, and then the third screen, the fourth screen. What's going on? Sillin looked at Moon, who was flying over. Moon spread his hands. "I just completely released Byakuya from here." Chapter 380. The white spirit lived up to the name of Ghost. Although she had no physical body and could only appear as a projection, she was very free inside the electronic systems. In a way, she was more like a virus to the Robert family people on the spaceplane. The Robert family could build robots this well, so they should be very good at system maintenance as well. But in the blink of an eye, the dozen or so light screens in the control room were filled with the white figure. Robert Borat, the man who spoke earlier, was so angry that he was shaking all over. When he came up with this plan, he didn't think that the guardian ghost of this place would be so difficult to deal with. He also didn't think that there would be someone in this group who could resist the interference and keep the energy shield stable all the time. How in the world did the trash of Sector V possess such technology? Borat clenched his fists tightly. No matter what, since he had taken charge of this plan, he had to complete it at all costs. This way, he would have more say when he returned to the Robert family. In terms of research, Borat couldn't compare to Friends. This was why his voice in the Robert family had always been weaker than Friends's. However, after working with the military, Borat relied on Beaver and Friends's diplomatic skills to obtain the support of the 8th Legion and some people in the Robert family. That was how he obtained the right to carry out a few operations. The first few operations were executed very well, and Borat was the one who discovered this place by accident. Borat's first thought wasn't to dig out the top-grade energy ores. Although the quality of the energy ores the Robert family had in reserve couldn't compare to these top-grade energy ores, they had the advantage in quantity. To Borat, the energy ores here were far less attractive than his plan. Just as Sillin and the others thought, Borat was the mastermind behind all this. He was planning to use this opportunity to eradicate some of the powerful forces in Sector V in one fell swoop, and this achievement was enough for him to receive even greater support from the Robert family and the 8th Legion when he returned. In fact, he even thought that if he completed his plan well, he might even surpass Friends and the others and become the new leader of the Robert family after the situation had stabilized. However, even though the ideal was good, reality caught Borat off guard. He didn't expect that the Freedom Army would join forces with Sillin and the others to come over. Just like many members of the Robert family, Borat was a typical stubborn and conceited person. He was overly confident and believed in the abilities of this mechanical army. Borat didn't analyze the 11th squad and what happened before. In Borat's eyes, only this Spectre could be considered an opponent. Borat got his subordinates to try and intercept the 10 or so screens in the control room that had been taken over, but he realized that it was impossible. The other party had already entered the room, and many of the programs in the system had already been modified and messed up on a large scale. Even if they tried to deal with it, the light screens only flashed twice, and they were unable to erase the white figure. "Open the secret room," Borat said to his subordinates. The secret room was an encrypted area developed by the Robert family. It was like a secret room in the network. Nothing from the outside could enter it. Normally, the secret room would not be opened, and the controllers would be exposed outside. However, once the secret room was opened, the controllers would be isolated from the external system. The opening of the secret room could increase security, but at the same time, it also increased limitations. Many functions on the aircraft would be forced to stop. However, Borat didn't care. It was fine as long as they could defend against this specter. Sillin observed the situation from the ground. Although he didn't know what was happening inside the aircraft, he could see the dense mechanical language. Through this mechanical language, Sillin knew that there was definitely a silent struggle going on inside. On the Freedom Army's side, Achenthus looked at the sky and then at Sillin's side. He suddenly felt somewhat powerless. At the same time, he was also glad that he called Sillin and the others. Otherwise, if they encountered this mechanical army, the people he brought would be far from enough to be slaughtered by the robots. Putting aside the difference in technology, the robot's combat strength was several times higher than his sides. Just looking at the corpses and mechanical wreckage outside the energy shield, it was obvious what would happen if they clashed head-on. What could they do against such an army? Hide inside the energy shield. Just as Achenthus was thinking, Sillin looked in a direction. The next moment, a white figure appeared there. The blue bar on Moon's face flashed. "Whitey, what's going on over there?" Whitey, although they had some thoughts about this name, they didn't say anything. What a joke. Facing this thing that was like a specter, who would want to provoke it? The white spirit didn't look at Moon. Instead, it stared at the aircraft in the sky and said, "They have isolation measures." "Then what do we do now?" Carrie looked at the robots outside and asked Sillin. If they went out like this, they would definitely not have an easy time. Those robots weren't the slow ones from before. They could clean up everything in the air in such a short time. If they went out, it would be a tragedy. Before Sillin could answer, Borat's voice came from the loudspeaker on the aircraft in the sky. "You guys like to hide inside, right?" "Very well, I'll let you personally experience the Robert family's mechanical army. Feel what the apocalypse is. Attack." Following Borat's order, the robots in the sky and on the ground started attacking the energy shield. Although they were able to withstand the bullets and cannons, the shockwaves caused by the intense attacks made the people inside feel dizzy. This was especially true for the Freedom Army. They did not have the protection of the 11th Squad. The protective suits they wore could only withstand the harsh environment of the planet, not the shockwaves from the shockwaves. The Freedom Army couldn't hold it in anymore. They shouted that they wanted to go out and fight the metal creatures outside. They would rather go all out than endure this kind of torture inside. Achenthus looked at Sillin and asked for his opinion. After all, Sillin and the others had control of the energy shield. If Sillin and the others didn't agree, there was nothing Achenthus could do unless they fought. However, he didn't want to break the alliance that they had worked so hard to form. Let them endure it for a while. "Half a minute at most," Sillin said. Sillin had Shikai and Shimu take over the controls. He also had Carrie and the others land the fighter. The people of the Freedom Army were getting more and more irritable. Because of the vibrations of the energy field, there were a lot of charged particles in the air inside the energy shield. The charged particles made them feel uncomfortable, like thousands of needles were poking at their bodies. Their bad temper was triggered. If it wasn't for Achenthus suppressing them, they would have already started fighting. In this half a minute, Sillin and the 11th Squad started reorganizing their equipment. The weapons used to deal with the robots were different from the ones used to deal with humans. The bullets used were also different. Clad in armor, Carrie, and the others walked out of the fighter. Out of habit, Carrie installed a shoulder cannon on his shoulder and buckled the foldable wrist blade on his arm. Then, he assembled his gun and stretched his limbs while holding it. When Achenthus counted to the 23rd second, a high-energy beam appeared in the sky. The target wasn't the energy shield they were in, but the robots outside. They weren't just coming from the sky. They were coming from every direction. Originally, it shouldn't have taken this long for the robots to arrive from the starship. However, Shikai had to spend a little more time to make a better setup. The Freedom Army was a little stunned. Not long ago, they saw a robot army slaughtering a couple of Sector V's other forces core. Now, a similar beam was pointing at the robot army outside the energy shield. Who is it? Inside the spaceplane, Borat looked very bad. The spaceplane he was in had been hit a few times, and he nearly fell to the ground just now. It was only after he had his men activate the energy shield that he recovered a little. However, it was only a little. Since the secret room was open, part of the detector's functions were disabled. It was why they didn't notice the incoming enemies at first notice. Are those robots? Borat's subordinates exclaimed in surprise. The distant robots were growing closer and closer. Their silvery white bodies glowed coldly in the dark sky. Yes, everyone who saw them knew that they were robots. Moreover, the appearance of these robots was similar to the mechanical army that Borat was currently controlling. Some were in the shape of birds, some were in the shape of humans, and some were in the shape of other animals. What? Is there anyone else in the League of Stars other than the Robert family who possesses such a mechanical army? Inrelson asked next to Akenthus. Blue looked at Scyllane's direction and said softly, "This is why they are so mysterious." The robots on both sides grew closer and closer. The robots that were attacking the energy shield turned their muzzles towards the newcomers. Although the outside didn't look much different, Borat quickly discovered that the new batch of robots were very adaptable. They were more like well-trained soldiers who knew how to line up, cover, and cooperate better. For example, when the robots on his side were concentrating their firepower, a large robot would appear and activate a beam shield. At the same time, the smaller robots around them would swiftly hide behind the beam shield and the large robot. Then, almost at the same time, the robots that were hiding behind the large robot would swiftly change directions and launch a crazy counterattack right after the first round of gunfire. Such a thing was easy to say, but if combined with the flying speed of those robots, it would be very difficult. Although the robots' programmed commands allowed them to do this, Borat still felt that there was something wrong with these newcomers. He couldn't tell why, but he felt a little annoyed. While Borat was annoyed, under the watchful eyes of everyone inside the energy shield, the two sides collided. Borat had always felt that his mechanical army was the best in the League of Stars. The amount of money that the Robert family had spent on them was enough to make any of the top families in the League of Stars turn their heads. Even the 8th Army had invested a lot of money into this army. However, all of Borat's pride was shaken by this brief collision. A batch of robots was sent flying. Although some stabilized themselves after being knocked back, the large dents on their bodies showed that they had failed. Looking at the other side, even if there were dents, they weren't to a frightening degree. Moreover, they recovered in an extremely short period of time. Although they were both made of memory alloy, there was a clear difference in the speed at which they rebounded. This wasn't just a problem with the material. It also involved other aspects. Even though Borat wasn't very accomplished in research, he still had some knowledge about robots. From this brief collision, Borat saw too many things. When a mechanical beast from the Shi family that looked like an eagle collided with another mechanical beast, it didn't separate from its opponent. Instead, at the moment of contact, it suddenly transformed from an eagle into a python and tightly coiled around the mechanical beast. Many serrated teeth appeared on the python's body, and the teeth carried high-energy lasers. Then, as it coiled around the mechanical beast, it cut the trapped prey into several pieces. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. There were many situations similar to this eagle mechanical beast. They could choose the best method and form based on the opponent they encountered and then kill their prey. The few small mechanical beasts on the ground also used a similar method to resist. When faced with a large opponent, they quickly gathered together and fused into a large body that was even larger than the opponent. Scylla saw the newly assembled big guy that looked like a diamond waving its huge fist and twisting a robot in front of it into two. Then, it nimbly turned around and hammered the guy that was preparing to sneak up on it. The sneak attacker's head was directly smashed by the diamond hammer. Bang! Following the shot of a cannonball, a big hole appeared in the chest of the big mechanical King Kong. However, it didn't collapse. Instead, it split into a few small mechanical beasts and continued their hunting mission. What is that? Some of the Freedom Army members were stunned. Inside the energy shield, Shikai put away the microcontroller in his hand. It's not perfected yet. I can only use rough embryos to fight first. Shikai's tone was regretful, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up to show his pride. Look, even rough embryos are enough to deal with these trash. After observing the situation for a while, Scylla signaled Shimu. Let's move on to the next step. A while later, several large energy shields appeared around the area where Scylla and the others were located. These shields protected the energy ores so that they wouldn't be usable if they were destroyed. Now that they had released White Knight, there was no need for Scylla to stay in this area any longer. He signaled to the 11th squad, and they immediately got ready to work as a team. They had done this many times already, and the newcomers like Mogaz and the others had gotten used to it pretty well. After notifying Alkenthus, Shikai closed the large energy barrier outside. With Shikai's robots keeping the Robert family's mechanical army busy, the 11th squad didn't encounter too many of them. Carrie cheered and rushed out. They were actually quite familiar with dealing with robots. Sometimes, when Shusag wasn't fighting them, Shikai would send his robots to spar with him. That was why the 11th squad didn't need to get into battle mode as soon as they entered the battlefield. However, as he slashed and slashed, Carrie saw a monkey-like robot not far away jump sideways and dodge the opponent's shot. When it twisted in the air, it swung its arm and twisted the opponent's neck. Then, using the force of the rotation, it swung its arm again and accelerated when it landed. After drawing an arc, it smashed its opponent hard into the ground. Both Carrie and Shusag's faces twitched at the sight. Why does this feel so familiar? It seemed like they had fought like this not long ago in the training room of the starship. However, it was Carrie who was flung out of the training room. This time, it was the Robert family robot who was pinched by the neck and smashed into the ground. This planet's geological structure was quite hard, so a human wouldn't be able to create such a spectacular scene even if all the bones in their body were broken. Still unsatisfied, Shikai's monkey-shaped robot added 2 more kicks. If it wasn't for another Robert family robot, Carrie had a feeling that the monkey-shaped robot would have used its laser blade to finish off the robot. Carrie didn't know what happened to the robot that got slammed into the ground by the neck, but it didn't get up for a long time. The only thing it could see was the occasional sparks of electricity, which showed how hard it had been. Huimao didn't want to get involved in this battle. The only thing it cared about was the energy ores. It didn't care how many robots it killed. However, after a small energy ore pile next to it that was not protected by the protective shield was blown up, Lord Cat's hair stood on end. Meow. I'm not going crazy. Do you think I'm just here to act cute? Everyone witnessed the scene of a fat, round cat turning into a mighty mechanical beast in the blink of an eye. Then, the big cat in a berserk state spread its wings and flew into the air. It opened its mouth and roared. This roar made the people who heard it feel a sharp pain in their eardrums. Even the helmets of the protective suits couldn't stop it. Huimao's roar wasn't just sound waves. The robots in a large area around Huimao, whether they were from the Robert family or the new batch of robots made by Shikai, all showed signs of slowing down. However, Shikai's new robots were much slower than the Robert family's robots. It was this small difference that caused the Robert family's robots to suffer a tragedy. After slapping a few robots away with its wings, Huimao officially began to vent. In terms of speed, not even Shikai's new robots were a match for Huimao. Moreover, although the cat wasn't usually very reliable, its brain reacted very quickly during critical moments. Ever since it joined the fray, it had barely been hit once. At most, it was grazed by bullets. The sight of the gray cat's claw caused Renaissance to shudder again and again. It was because that claw, just a single claw, had hollowed out half the waist of the big guy who had beaten them into such a sorry state. Inside a spaceplane, Mo Hung poked Shikai, who was watching the battle outside, and asked, "When are you going to build a mech or a mech beast like Silen's pet?" Shikai curled his lips, but he didn't say anything. His complacent expression had vanished completely. There was no good or bad without comparison. Compared to the Robert family's robots, Shikai's new robots were undoubtedly superior. However, it was only after Huimao's appearance that Shikai's attention shifted from Huimao to Cheto. Oh right, there was also Cheto. Unlike Huimao's high profile, Cheto had always been like a shadow. His presence was very low, but he had done far too many amazing things when no one was paying attention to him. Cheto looked like an oddball among the armored and protective suits. He was an oddball that people couldn't help but gasp in amazement. He didn't use a blade. He only used his own hands. He didn't have wings, but his speed wasn't any slower than the robots in the sky. He didn't use any eye-catching energy beams, but too many robots had fallen to the ground wherever he went. When would they be able to build a robot like this? When would a robot army with every robot of this level be built? There was still a long way to go. Mo Hung scratched his white hair and let out a hoarse chuckle when he saw that Shikai's mood had gone from high to heavy. Then, he sat back down and continued watching the battle on the monitor. He was getting old, and he would only be able to observe the battlefield from a similar space in the future. However, this didn't mean that he had left the battlefield. He had created fighter aircrafts for Carey and the 11th Squad, and he had created improved weapons for them as well. He could empathize with the children who were fighting on the battlefield with such equipment. His heart was no longer young, but his blood still boiled as easily as before. Silen cut down the robots one by one with his long, thin blade while swallowing his opponents one by one like the king of snakes in a hunting ground. The robots hit by the Hell Thunder Snake S would explode one after another, and the trio who had been paying attention to Silen noticed it as well. A couple of robots around Silen had been killed before they could even get close to him, and most of them weren't aiming at Silen at all. Achenthus recalled the incident on the passenger starship. If a conflict had broken out back then, the three of them would have been the ones to die. Forget Cheto, Silen alone was enough to send all three of them to hell. Moreover, Achenthus was sure that the strange gray cat was on the starship at the time. He was glad that he hadn't made an enemy out of a person like that. Their team was only made up of a handful of people, but they always managed to surprise him. Our cooperation must continue. This was the firm resolution Achenthus had made after this experience. Unlike Achenthus, Qing's attention was drawn to Silen's blade. Other people might not know the origin of the blade, but Qing did. Her foster father used to be a big shot of Sector V, but he was assassinated later on. From her adoptive father's notebook, she learned about the star hunter Osculos, as well as Osculos's slender blade. Indigo was a little suspicious when she saw Silen take out the blade, but as Silen cut down the robots one by one, she realized that the blade was a piece of cake for her and the others, even though their expensive blades weren't able to do it easily. That's right, it must be that blade. Osculos was killed by someone. The news was spreading throughout Sector V, but no one could come to a conclusion as to who killed Osculos. Some said it was another star rank hunter, and some said it was a heavenly mandate soldier from the military. It was because no one could imagine that someone at their level could be killed by someone else. But now, Osculos's blade was in Silen's hands. How could Qing not be shocked? Who the hell is Silen? Other than Shikai's mechanical army, the 11th Squad and the Freedom Army, spikes, clamps and other traps would pop out of the ground from time to time. They were all controlled by White Knight. A lot of people had come here before, and all of them had perished in this area. Not even their bones were left behind. Right now, their opponents were robots. Even if these traps weren't as effective as they could be, they were still a great help. On the battlefield, the situation began to tilt. Borat almost pulled out his meticulously groomed hair, but it was useless even if he scratched himself bald. His subordinates had already made arrangements to escape. Borat's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the scenes displayed on the screen. He slapped away his subordinate who came over to persuade him and muttered incoherently. The subordinate who had been slapped until his mouth was bleeding did not care if he would be slapped again. Together with a few others, they dragged Borat away. Their main mission was to protect Borat. This was a mission given to them by the upper echelons of the race. If Borat died, all of them and their families would be buried with him. Half an hour later, a disc-shaped spaceship detached from Borat's mother spaceship. Borat was forcefully dragged inside by a few of his core subordinates. This small spaceship was obviously specially made. The robots outside fired at it, but in the blink of an eye, the spaceship disappeared. Damn it, he escaped. Hui Mao grabbed a robot that was blocking its way and swallowed it into its mouth as if venting its anger. It chewed hard a few times before spitting out a pile of metal debris. Seeing this, Shikai could not help but smack his forehead. Creating a mechanical beast like this was too damn difficult. Now that the master had escaped, the remaining soldiers were just cannon fodder. Hui Mao ignored the robots and rushed into the abandoned mother spaceship to search for valuables. Chapter 381. Weiss held a huge grudge against the Robert family because the spaceplane had exploded before it could even get much out of it. If it was in the past, the energy ores on the aircraft could still be pried out. After all, they were worth some money. But now that there were so many top-grade energy ores on the ground, the ones on the aircraft couldn't catch the cat's attention. Weiss let out a loud curse as it stared at the destroyed spaceplane in the sky. Then, it returned to the surface and continued its great mining business. It didn't even bother to look anyone in the eye, and they were smart enough not to provoke the cat. Only a few robots were left struggling. The frequency of falling objects had decreased a lot. Due to the different composition of the atmosphere, the debris didn't burn for long and the sky returned to its original state. Sillin looked at the debris on the ground and then at the robots that were still struggling. They weren't affected by the destruction of the aircraft. They were relatively independent, but they could always follow their master's orders. Aside from the fact that they didn't have their own thoughts, this kind of mechanical army was pretty good. It was just that they were unlucky to run into the Shi family and the Shi family's army. Shikai was the only one behind the Shi family army, but the genius Shimu was also on their side. If the Robert family couldn't win now, then it would only get worse in the future. A Yu's secret would boost the Shi family's morale. Although you didn't say anything, Sillin had the same feeling. Some people from the Freedom Army had already started cleaning up the battlefield. Others continued mining. Now that the enemies were dealt with, they could go mining without worry. A person from the Freedom Army was holding a tool and was about to start digging at a relatively large pile of ore. But as soon as he got close, a pair of cat paws appeared on the pile of ore, followed by a seemingly harmless cat head. Hui Mao pressed its paws against the pile of ore and looked at the person carrying the tool. It bared its teeth at the person who was holding the tool. The person was stunned for a moment, then quickly turned around and ran away as if it was the plague. Seeing that the person was so tactful, Hui Mao didn't continue to press and continued to mine. The people from the Freedom Army looked at each other and curled their lips. Forget it, don't provoke that cat. Didn't you see how those metal men were turned into ashes? The Freedom Army attributed Hui Mao's behavior to an animal's sense of territory. In truth, everyone in the 11th Squad knew that territory was bullshit. What awareness! To that bastard, These mines were nothing but piles of fish biscuits. Acanthus discussed with Scylla for a while and divided the area. Scylla occupied the majority of the area. After dividing the area, mining would be faster and there would be no conflicts. The Freedom Army had no complaints right now, and the metal soldiers were still floating in the sky. If a fight broke out, then they would definitely be the ones to suffer. It was better to be obedient, and at least they could reap some benefits. The fact that Acanthus had brought them here meant that their brains were a bit better than most of the lunatics at Sector V. Not only were they a bit better skilled, they were also smarter than most of the madmen at Sector V. The danger was over, and there were still metal soldiers standing guard in the air. Old Mo also wandered out to survey the terrain and the surrounding environment. Others were concerned about the mineral deposits, but Mo Hung was more concerned about how such a mineral deposit could form here. Although Mo Hung was not proficient in these things, he had studied similar projects for a period of time in the past. After investigating this place, Mo Hung had a guess. He felt that someone had used the environment and magnetic field here and used some technology to catalyze the formation of this mineral deposit. Mo Hung didn't know how, but he did know that there were traces of artificial modification. It was just that it was a long time ago, and it wasn't that obvious. When Mo Hung mentioned his doubt to Scylla smiled and told him not to look into it. Old Mo sighed, as I thought, there are top geniuses in every era. It's just that some have been discovered and become famous overnight, and some have remained unknown until now. Scylla didn't explain the Shi family's matter to Mo Hung, and the old man pretended to be confused. Mo Hung had speculated a lot of things during his time with the 11th Squad, but he didn't show it on his face. He pretended that he didn't know anything, and since Scylla told him not to look into it, Mo Hung pretended that he didn't notice anything. There were a lot of wounded, but the people of the 11th Squad were fine. Chifun's claw wound was a little more serious, but the others only suffered minor injuries. The 11th Squad had also provided aid to the Free Army. If it weren't for them, the Free Army would have suffered more casualties. Aiken thus was very grateful for this. A lot of places on the planet, especially places with a lot of mineral deposits, had projectors installed underground. That was why White Knight could be seen in the form of a projection. For example, right now, White Knight, Moon, and Sigma were taking a walk, side by side, but no one knew what they were talking about. It was a soundless conversation that most people couldn't hear. After a period of communication, Moon and White Knight walked into the spaceplane. We stopped watching them after seeing that the mines had been cordoned off and played with them. You're White Knight. Hui Mao stood on a high shelf and looked down at the white projection below. It was growing more and more fond of the feeling of looking down at others from a high place. White Knight didn't answer. She simply looked at Hui Mao. After the chaotic battle earlier, she already knew what was different about the cat. Whis wagged its tail. I know a guy called White Knight from the Mist Bodhisattva sect, but he's a man. His eyes are one black and one white, and he looks like an idiot. Ah, there's something in common between the two of you, and that is you both have facial paralysis. White Knight and Moon. Can't this cat speak a little more gracefully? Although White Knight didn't have much of an expression on her face, you knew that she still cared a lot about Whis' words. Moreover, her name was originally just one word, and that was, White. It was only because of the minerals and the Olilo incident in the myth of creation that she was labeled as, White. Actually, it's not that big of a deal. The League of Stars and Mist Bodhisattva are huge. There are plenty of people with the same name, Sigma hurriedly explained. White Spirit. What? Hui Mao cocked an ear to the side and looked at the white figure below. I'll be called White Spirit from now on. White Knight is the name of the energy mine, White Spirit said. You swung his arms and circled the White Spirit. In any case, I'll just call you Whitey. You told Whis about the White Spirit. Now that the White Spirit was completely free, she no longer needed to guard the energy mine. The Shi family was supposed to stay together, wasn't it? That was why the White Spirit was supposed to stay with Sigma and Moon. Hui Mao slowly wagged his tail and stared at White Spirit for a while. You don't look like a bad person. Fine, I'll let you join the team. When Carrie heard Hui Mao's words, he curled his lips and knocked Hui Mao on the head with a tool. Then, he quickly put down the tool and slipped away. Hui Mao bared his teeth at Carrie's back, stretched out his claws, and pulled them back. I'll deal with him later. I'll pry open all of Carrie's storage cabinets. No one knew what the White Spirit was thinking when she saw the scene. Even though to others, she was just a virtual character created by a program, just like the original robot, the White Spirit had her own thoughts, and that was what amazed Shikai. Hui Mao bent his forelimbs and combed the hair on his head that was messed up by Carrie. Then, he looked at White Spirit and asked, "Oh right, when did you become Cheto's girlfriend?" White Spirit. Who the hell is Cheto? The White Spirit looked at Moon, who was counting his fingers, and then at Sigma, who was looking left and right. I want to know as well. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.